Okay, we'll dive. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. And welcome to.
We're live.
Okay, good morning and welcome to the first February 2025 edition of the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation. So today we're going to talk about the news of this week, the advent of the model known as DeepSeek, which came out from China and which has challenged a lot of our assumptions about how technology and science is done today. But we're going to talk about it in relation to what this says about the social systems in the U.S. and China. So I'm looking forward to this discussion a lot. And I'll pass it over to Dr.
Thanks, Umberto. I guess everybody knows about what happened with DeepSeek last week, and in the wake of what it achieved, the stock market lost $1,000 in value. Now, what that means, these stocks are all based upon speculative values, but nonetheless, it was a measure of the psychological response of what they call the markets, by which they mean the stock markets, the investors, and the people, what they call the seven sisters, the seven most powerful tech companies. I get up to 5 and I forget the last 2, but they're all the same. Whether they can admit it now or yet, it's a rude awakening for the ruling elite of this country. I think it is even a deeper crisis, I'll put it that way, than the election of Trump. So much is at stake. DeepSeek, which is a artificial intelligence lab, a very small one, that was really connected to a hedge fund. And they wanted to do analysis and use artificial intelligence to assist and improve their data analysis. In the process, the lab experimented and with several things, both software and hardware. I want to talk about that. But they experimented and came up with an application that would do precisely what OpenAI does, much more quickly. What else could I say? They could do the same thing for, just pennies on the dollar. In other words, let us take something like 700 data bits, or a data bit that can be representative of 700,000 letters in a sentence or a paragraph. OpenAI, which I hope I remembered properly, OpenAI would charge something like $250. Am I right, Jerry? Could somebody help me? Something $250, where DeepSeek could do the same thing for 14 cents. The exact same thing. That they did it with the expenditure far less money. OpenAI, to get to where they are, to create an algorithm that not only turns out data and answers questions, but that can kind of do reasoning processes or logic itself. A app that can learn through practice how to get it better. I think of it sometimes, you think about a sentence. By the way, I'm going to try to get my AI apps. These things I say, I got to get an app to straighten out my language. But yeah, but you take a sentence and you want to translate it to Chinese or Korean. The app can learn to improve by the mistakes it made. And so this developmental process that is built in to both the OpenAI and the DeepSeek AI. So it improves as it experiences or does the operations on data, but much cheaper, much cheaper. But also, they have released this as open source, yeah. Whereas OpenAI kept it closed and proprietary. So this means that people all over the world, especially the Afro-Asiatic world, the formerly colonized world, can quickly access AI, do the operations, and all that it means. But remember that Trump and then Biden sanctioned China from getting, I got to put quotes, the most advanced chips, which were NVIDIA. That's why they collapsed $600 billion in one day, because it was hype. And what DeepSeek and other Chinese labs have done is to use old chips and repackage them or layer them or redesign them to do what the most advanced chips do. So where the United States and the West thought they were doing something cool, they found out it backfired on them because the Chinese found ways to get around it. We'll talk about why that is the case later. While there's a lot of talk about what this DeepSeek thing means in the long run, the short run even, and there is no agreement. You listen to, all of the various podcasts and people that like to talk a lot, and they have differing opinions. From, well, this is no big thing, to know the Chinese have changed the game, and so on. Of course, Trump came out and said, congratulated DeepSeek and said, well, we're all going forward together, and that it's open source means that we can all grow from this. Well, this was a gut blow to him, and he had to put a good face on it so that the markets wouldn't decline any further. This is not a happy day for them, and I'll explain why. This was a blow to the assumptions of the white supremacist social system. There's no way to get around it. It's interesting that most of the scientists in Silicon Valley and AI in this country are Chinese and Indians. Now, this raises all kinds of other questions. And Trudilla and I were just talking, where she said a lot of Indians have gotten laid off. And she says to them, well, why are you so sad? Just go back to India and help India. And I said to her, well, they can't, because they became white. And they proceed from the assumptions of whiteness. I mean, for real, they can, but it will not be like they say the gospel song, "Oh Happy Day." It's not a happy day. if I have to go back and live among Indians. But and so it is with a lot of Chinese. Not so much, however, I don't think. But this battle between DeepSeek or the Chinese AI laboratories and Silicon Valley, it's almost like Chinese versus other Chinese.
Yeah, for real.
Chinese in America versus Chinese in China, and it looks like the Chinese in China are winning, which is a good thing. I mean, it's a wake-up call. Uh, we'll return to that. I mean, it's a familiar narrative for us, given our study of Baldwin and our understanding of how white assumptions are necessary to establish a certain white identity, which is not necessarily associated with physical whiteness. And I think, well, we've kind of explored this in this year of Baldwin, and we understand it. But then something I'll talk about in a minute, the epistemological struggle, the struggle over ways of knowing the world and ways of situating oneself in the world. And it's vastly different in China, even though I know, even though I know that Alice and other people like Kathy are very critical of China these days, at least at the level of young people. There is a vast difference between the assumptions, epistemologies, and so on of China and of the United States. The assumptions upon which science operates in this country are white supremacist ones. Science does not proceed from white supremacist assumptions in China. I want to explore that a bit. In some ways, and I think about something that Shakespeare said, or had Macbeth say it in the play, about an idiot, and somehow the way Trump has proceeded without anchorage, without a clear direction, without anything purposeful and positive to say to the American people, but just going all over the place. And then the response of the white elites to DeepSeek. And Shakespeare said it's like a tale told by an idiot, filled with sound and fury, signifying nothing.
Yeah.
And it kind of gets that way. And unless you see them in this state of confusion, and they are. And it's so interesting also how the U.S., which uses representation as a form of communication. So we've come out of the era where LeBron James or Taylor Swift or Beyonce or Jay-Z or whoever, I don't know who's the latest quarterback, become tropes through which social values and social communication takes place. So you don't have to think. Well, but they shifted recently. Now the representation is like an Elon Musk or a Sam Altman. in a sense because the representations of white supremacy have shifted. And obviously, and I would make this argument, that a LeBron James is a representative of white civilization and white supremacy. And he is paid to do that. Barack Obama was the same thing. Well, Taylor Swift. But they all function in the same way. Of course, Baldwin teaches this so eloquently. But now the tech bros, the seven sisters of Silicon Valley, have become that. But this is a ruling elite who, like Shakespeare said, act like a tale told by an idiot. You know, and I think we found the key to open the door to understanding who they are. And they're not that smart, definitely not that competent. And now here comes DeepSeek. I'll explain how that fits in. Well, at a certain level, the American elites and talking heads who first treated the whole thing of DeepSeek as an existential crisis. Then you notice they quickly changed and said, no big thing. And then they stole it from us anyway. But their assumptions were penetrated, let me give you an example of what I'm trying to say. Last night, Serafina and I looked at Fountainhead. It's a period piece, a philosophical movie, and I guess in some ways, by today's standards, you'd have to say it's not that good. I thought it was good. Yeah. Especially, I mean, they were wearing some clothes in that movie, man. I mean, cats out on some suits. I mean, I said, dang, that kind of representation. But the story is about the Superman, the super intellect, just in the same way that Megalopolis is. You know, in Fountainhead, he's an architect. In Megalopolis, he's a city planner, AKA a gentrifier, you know. But they save the day. The Superman, the Ubermensch saves humanity. He must be white, he must be male, and he must proceed from white assumptions. Well, in real life, that's what they saw AI as.
Yes.
I was looking at a clip of Sam Altman, the founder, head of OpenAI. By the way, none of these people they are representing more than they don't run everything. It's just like Zuckerberg and them. They're powerful financial interests and political interests behind all of that. And you know, one thing you'll see, they all try to be edgy. You see Elon Musk, he's you know, all that. You know, he's never suited, he's never, you know, more and less not. Or maybe Sam Altman is more formal, but Zuckerberg the same. They're very informal, very edgy, tend to be younger. That's, you know, because it's supposed to represent the future. But I was looking at this podcast, and it was either a conference or a panel that Sam Altman was on. And this Indian scientist, I think it was in this country, although it could have been in Asia, this Indian scientist asked Sam Altman, how long will you think it will take for India to catch up to where OpenAI is. And he said, you'll never do it. Just like that. Not that there's a path to it, you'll never do it. And I think that says a lot because this goes for China,
Right.
you know, you'll never do it. Now, Chinese or Indians that come over here and proceed from white assumptions and epistemologies, they can do it. But Indians or Chinese in their countries and their civilizations will never do it. They literally thought that with AI, they would become gods of the universe. I mean, and that's not me. They saw themselves as gods. And AI would be the way to achieve the super intellect, the super intelligence. And anyone that thinks they want to challenge us, for example, the Chinese, we will sanction you, you won't get the most advanced chips. So the Chinese said, we did for self. We made, like black folks say, you gave us lemons, we made lemonade. And they did. This is huge. But the idea that they would rule forever, and I would say I'm not exaggerating. When we talk about the white assumptions, they do not see a retreat from white supremacy. They see integrating Asians, Africans, and others into their assumptions, but only to help us in achieving a permanent state of white supremacy. I'm very interested in somebody doing a sociology of the Chinese in these, powerful tech firms. What do they think? What must they suppress to get paid, as it were? And suppose the white man lays you off or fires you. Can you go back to China and live with the Chinese people? No. You don't think so? I don't think so either. Most cannot. But in the end, whatever went in to producing a DeepSeek, and Alibaba, said, well, you think that's something? We got something even better than that coming out in a couple of weeks. So, huh? I don't think so. Oh, it's already out? Alibaba's already out? Oh, you've been okay. I mean, even the most advanced Alibaba. Okay. See, the white, forgive me, a lot of people say, Tony, you always racialize and you're talking about the white man and all that stuff. No, when I say the white man, I'm talking about the social system and the white people that uphold it. So maybe that'll take the edge off. But it is a clash of social systems more than a clash of civilizations. The American system is a white supremacist social system. You can't get around it. The assumptions of a white supremacist social system, and this is Baldwin, ultimately defeat the white supremacist. The Chinese social system is not a white supremacist social system. The assumption of the right to rule, the right to dominate, proceeding from an idea of the supremacy of white people. and their systems and their beliefs. Anyone who is going through the education system of this country has experienced this in one or another way. Be you the kid at South Philadelphia High School or the PhD student at Berkeley or Stanford or Harvard. Everyone knows that to be successful, ultimately, you must bend to white supremacist values. And it's so interesting. Asians in America think and act differently than Asians in Asia. And the question is why? What makes the difference? And you know, I'm really very influenced by Kathy's observations about Taiwan, which is imitative of America, if you don't mind me, and South Korea. It is an imitation of a white world that is not Asian, not South Korean, not Chinese. And I think, Kathy, I think about your observations all the time, although they don't have to be that accurate because you didn't go all over the country. But there's something that you observe phenotypically, culturally, and other ways that shows a difference between Taiwanese and people in the People's Republic. I mean, it might even be more apparent if you take South Korea and North Korea. That would be an interesting study. But nonetheless, the assumption, white assumptions, I'm going to go quick. I'm sorry to go so. You know, in the Lucian Blackwell reading group last Tuesday, we were talking about Asians, and this was Jerry brought, you know, talk. By the way, I very much appreciate your transparency. It is, I mean, for me, it's learning, and I think for the people in that reading group, it is. They've never heard an Asian. Well, they don't hear Asian people speak that much anyway. To speak about his or her experience that way, it's very, very important. So it was like whiteness among Asians here, let us say. But then the other question is whiteness in Asia. And this is what Crystal was telling me about when she went to Shanghai and Thailand. You know, in some ways, you hadn't left the white world, especially in the major cities, you know? So the existence of whiteness in, quote, non-white countries. But once one, no matter who she or he is, no matter where they're from, Ghana or Shanghai or wherever, to be successful in this society, you must accept and proceed upon the acceptance and act like you know that white people are superior. That the smartest people in the world are white. They are rich not because they're corrupt, they're rich because they're talented. Right. That is the brand of an Elon Musk. That he is the smartest, he's the richest man in the world because he's the smartest man in the world. Right. The Chinese social system does not operate upon those assumptions. There is reason to believe, in fact, that the Chinese social system is a fundamental challenge to the white supremacist system. And that doesn't mean that every Chinese person goes around saying, I'm fighting white supremacy. I guess most don't because they don't see white people. And they don't have to, which is good, But objectively, the Chinese social system challenges the white supremacist social system. I don't believe many Chinese people believe that white people are superior to them. Well, I don't think they think about white people that much, which is a good thing, But even if they did, they would not necessarily assume that white people were superior to them. In this country, overwhelmingly, most people, Black, white, Asian, Latino, whoever, in one or another way has embedded in their consciousness that white people are superior. Most African Americans assume white supremacy and act like it. Really, and that's a critical problem. But then the social system produces distinct epistemologies, ways of knowing the world and ways of being in the world. In a certain sense, Kathy, that explains, in a small level, what you saw and how you reacted to Taiwan and the People's Republic. And there is a difference, phenotypically, physically, the lack of the same kind of purposefulness, and so on. In spite of weaknesses, the Chinese social system predisposes the nation towards a more equal system and as they call it, a meritocracy. Your origins, your race, your religion, and other things are not a structural impediment to your achieving or being educated. In a society where everyone is educated, or the society strives to educate everybody and will achieve it, it produces a different way of knowing the world, what King called a radical revolution of values. In the United States, in a white supremacist social system, you don't educate everybody. Because the assumption, the epistemology, is that we are not all equal. And why waste money and time on educating those who will never achieve, but at a limited level? China operates differently. The epistemology, and by epistemology, without getting into a lot, I'm talking about a way of knowing and being in the world. One's identity is not shaped by a narrow epistemology based upon a racial hierarchy. It makes all the difference in the world. So, for example, you get a Duke Ellington or John Coltrane, they achieved in spite of the social system. In China, more than not, the social system encourages the least of these to achieve at levels of the most privileged. That's why a lot of more privileged Chinese don't feel comfortable in China. The same with Indians. I am more comfortable in a society and epistemology based upon hierarchies even if the hierarchy is a racial one and I'm not physically white. I'm more comfortable. This is what I like. This is the thing. I am more free in a white supremacist system than I would be in a Chinese system that encourages and the logic of the system moves towards equality. Let me suggest, and this is only tentative, how do these distinct epistemologies operate? And here I just want to suggest something about knowledge production. It is very fascinating to me to study the sociology of knowledge, the social conditions of knowledge, the social mechanisms of knowledge, the social behavior of principal agents in the knowledge structures. A system like China's gravitates to, is predisposed towards the social production of knowledge. In the United States, we celebrate the individual, although, frankly, all of it is sociological. But it is always to celebrate the individual achiever rather than the social achievement. Always. And that's everywhere. That's why professional sports is so uninteresting. It's all about the LeBron, the stars, the celebrity, it's really oppressive to most people psychologically. If we study DeepSeek, one of the things I suspect is that lab operated with other institutions, probably the local university, producing knowledge clusters. In other words, here it is a bunch of elite, forgive me using this word, scumbags who look down on everybody else running these corporations. So when Sam Altman said to that Indian, "You'll never catch up with us," he was saying, "Neither will you Chinese, and you Africans get back. You'll never do it. We are the gods of this world." That assumption, so ruthlessly expressed, and he was looking at that man in his face. And I criticized the man for not jumping up and slapping his face, to take that from this guy. You'll never do it. This is a man expressing something about the knowledge production process in the United States and the epistemology, the knowing and being in the world. You read the interviews with the founder of DeepSeek, you get something completely different. A kind of humility, a kind of a sense of I am a part of a nation, of the Chinese people, that this is an achievement not of me alone, but of Chinese people and the Chinese nation. And of course, a certain humility comes with that. The social nature of knowledge production, the principal unit of the social production of knowledge is the knowledge cluster. That is the atomic level that all knowledge is actively produced in social um, institutions. I'm calling these institutions knowledge clusters, and they're not just limited to the AI lab or the university lab or classroom. This increasingly is a way of combining academic or research activity with business activity, such as with DeepSeek. They were not even a AI lab as such. They were connected to a hedge fund that studies the movement of businesses and so on. They were, like not a think tank, but a business that provided information to um, to other businesses. They would do the quantitative analysis. I think the name of it was quantitative something, but DeepSeek was just an offshoot or part of that, which suggested to me that DeepSeek is a part of a knowledge cluster. What were the other elements of it? I don't know. It would be a great study of the ways that Chinese researchers and businesses and communities and universities operate and coordinate their operations. Just take, for example, they blew Indivia out of the water. That is the most important. I take that more than the algorithm, the software, that they produce the chips using older chips that, Indivia was, you can imagine, you know how white people are, sitting back, ha, 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 ha. You'll never get these, and we're going to sanction. That's why when they were brought down, again, Crystal and I were in Reading Terminal, and one of the men who comes to, Troy, that comes to the reading group, he happened to, be passing through, and said, "Hey, Troy," he said he would be here today, but I said, "Hey, Troy, hey, how you doing?" Introduced me, Crystal, and he said, "Yeah, you heard about China, what they did." He said, "I'm so glad."
I'm so happy.
It was really striking. The white man has got what he deserves. You know what I'm saying? So I just want to say that knowledge cluster. In the long run, these knowledge clusters are enriched as a society becomes more educated. The idea of knowledge clusters really confirms a lot about what we do here. Remember, there would always be this talk about, well, what are you doing? I mean, we're activists, you're just reading, you know what I'm saying? You remember that a few years ago? Well, you don't hear that much these days. But the key thing here is that knowledge is always a great motive force in the struggle for freedom. And especially now. And in some ways, our work and the way we operate is almost like a knowledge cluster. And the closer we have become to ordinary Philadelphians, the richer and deeper the knowledge produced by this cluster becomes. One can only imagine, if you take this on a whole societal level. Yeah. In China, 1.4 billion people. Come on, man. That's a whole lot of people, 20% of the world's population, operating on different epistemological assumptions and highly organized to produce knowledge, where knowledge becomes the highest value produced by society. So the society cannot afford to leave anybody behind. Every child must be educated ultimately. It's going to take some time, you know? The society must have a certain material level. Everybody is housed, everybody is clothed, everybody eats. You know, the environment produced by society says to people in the society, we value you, and for that reason, we value the environment that you have to live in. Everything increasingly values the human being and the child. I was talking to Emily, you know, really nice to talk to her about her dad, a granddad, a grandfather, and them. And so she, you know, she's saying she was going somewhere in Beijing. And I said, well, is your Chinese that good? She said, no, my Chinese isn't that good, but I know how to get around. And people are this is her words, I think. People are very kind to young people. A social value. You put young people first. What is the first thing you want to put after you provide for their material need? You want to put their education first. But that creates a positive feedback loop. The more you educate, the higher the level of society becomes. Every generation, not that I will do better as an individual than my father or mother did, but each generation will do better as a generation. Every generation will be more educated, and the highest value of society is education and knowledge. That's why, again, when Kathy talks about her trip to China, I went to all of these museums. I went, museums. That's the first thing all these museums everywhere. What is that saying? Art, knowledge, science. Not only, and I'll say this, not only has the United States, by the achievement of DeepSeek, lost the battle for supremacy in artificial intelligence and all that goes with it. First of all, the social structure of the United States, once AI and robots are completely integrated into economic and social life, it will create deeper social antagonisms because the economic benefits of it will go to a very, very few, and the majority of working people will be further impoverished. Whereas in China, the society is increasingly, and I'm not saying this that it's achieved this, but increasingly set up where such technologies as AI can be integrated into social life without deepening social antagonisms and social inequalities. I was compelled to think, a lot about this, what this DeepSeek thing says. I think it is maybe the first indication that the world has had that China might be the most advanced society on the planet. That don't mean that everybody's doing good. That don't mean that, there ain't people that drink too much or people that do, everybody ain't on the same level. And that's not the, 1.4 billion people. But if you go across the world, and you measure societies based upon qualities of the population, China might already be the most advanced society on the planet. That increasingly the society is constructed in such a way to produce advanced knowledge, not just devices. Remember that consigned China to the manufacturing center of the world to produce devices cheaply, like iPhones for white people and Westerners. Now China has moved to the forefront of the production of knowledge. Now, clearly with AI, we're only talking about one sphere of knowledge. And I don't make that the ultimate measure of the advancement of a society. I think still the claims that are made over here, and it's made to brand this high tech stuff. Oh, it's the greatest thing, and we're gonna have super intelligence. Well, see, that's marketing, advertising. You know what I'm saying? Oh, we ain't gonna need human beings no more because we're gonna solve all the problems of cancer and drug addiction, and we got something with AI going to produce something superior to LSD. And keep it moving, party like it's 1999. That's a song by Prince. But it's marketing, it's advertising, but then isn't it so interesting when you deconstruct it? Is this an advertisement for AI? Is this an advertisement for whiteness? Oh, we solved all the great research in the world comes from the United States. See, that's part of Trump's problem. See, he can't get free of that white supremacy. That's why, remember Dudad said that he was a man of destiny. We said, no, history comes into his man of destiny and then the farce. Well, he's the farce. No matter how much positive in deconstructing the deep state or whatever he does, he's still a farce. The train of human progress has left the station, and the American leadership are not driving that train. So, okay. But what are the preconditions for what we see in China today? It has occurred in a very brief period historically. It is the Chinese Revolution. In the same way that if India is to achieve and has achieved, and India has achieved tremendously, it is on the shoulders of the Indian independence movement. Any Indian that thinks he or she is so smart and that Gandhi was flawed and this and that or dumb or didn't know what he was talking about needs to be slapped in the face. Were it not for Gandhi and the independence movement, they would still be, like they say, back home on the farm. But for China, and this is the greatness of the Chinese social system, political system, they have not forgotten the preconditions for where they are today. That's what, when Kathy, I keep talking about Kathy because when she talked about this, has been so impressed me so much. When Kathy talks about the museums that she visited, and she said, you go into the museum and there's a statement by Xi Jinping. People say, oh, that's the cult of the personality. No, it's not. It's the leader of the country expressing the values of the leadership of the country, which then puts into further perspective. And here I'm talking about the qualitative conditions to make qualitative changes. You know, to lift 800 million people out of poverty. That's a quantitative achievement. But what were the qualitative preconditions for that? DeepSeek. Okay, you stabbed the white man in the heart. You brought him down. The whole world is celebrating. You know what I mean? And the world is celebrating. You brought the white man down. But what were the qualitative preconditions? And to the extent that the Chinese people and their leadership recognize the revolutionary preconditions for what they have today, to that extent they can move forward. Once they forget that, then they become, then they will be victimized by the West. In other words, the Chinese identity, and I always said, I never knew any Chinese people till I came to the free school, or y'all came to the free school, I came to y'all. The purpose of almost every person's life, their love for their children, all of this is deeply tied up with their consciousness, their identification with the Chinese Revolution. I can be as mad at Mao Zedong as you can be, and I am. Emily's mother don't like, and father don't like Mao, don't like the Cultural Revolution, and many people don't in China. But one thing they know, that were it not for Mao Zedong and that first generation of Chinese communists and the Long March and the defeat of the Kuomintang and the declaration of the People's Republic of China, we still be one of the three poorest nations in the world, and the white West would be laughing at you. And if Chinese over here get it confused, when China was on its knees, and this is when we were coming up, when China was on its knees and poor, oh, you couldn't imagine how happy the white man over here was to put it on television. Oh, they love to keep that on television 24/7. Am I lying? They know what I'm talking. When China was on its knees, even when there was the Cultural Revolution and they were just, oh my God, this is so beautiful to see these people poor. Now they've lifted 800 million out of poverty. People are being educated. They stabbed you in the heart with DeepSeek and all that. Now we hate you. Why you hate me when I'm doing good and love me when I'm doing bad? But see, the assumption of white supremacy, that it confirms when Chinese are poor, when Africa is poor, it confirms what I've said all the time, that you are inferior. But when you achieve, I can't handle that no more because you're challenging my basic assumption. So, okay, but, and I have to say, I think about your report back so often, and I think what you saw between Taiwan and People's Republic was a different identity. A different identity. And a difference in what you identify with. Because your identity is not just you, it's also what you identify with. And now, I was listening once again to Xi Jinping's speech on the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party. It's a great speech given by a great man, representing a great political movement. There is probably no leader in the world today equivalent to Xi Jinping. That doesn't mean you have to love Xi Jinping, but what he represents, and I'm going to explain that in a minute. And he spoke slowly, which I try to encourage in free school, but deliberately and clearly. And there was one phrase among many that he said. He said, "We are a rational and serious people." I said, there you go. We are a rational and serious people. And he talked about socialism with Chinese characteristics, which I'd gotten wrong most of the time. I thought, socialism carried out by Chinese. No, it's not that superficial. What he is saying, socialism designed to solve the problems of China. Socialism designed to lift 800 million people out of poverty, to educate generations, to develop a cohesive and united people. That's Chinese characteristics. It's not nobody else's socialism. The other thing is the Communist Party of China. We have to get that right. The white world always says the Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party, CCP. The Chinese say CPC, the Communist Party of China. They're not trying to say they're the Communist Party of Chinese in Vietnam or in Japan. They're the Communist Party of China, which also suggests, if you can deal with the nuance of it, the leading party of the Chinese state. Now, this is very, very important. And this is why we have talked often about the state of the whole people, by the way. And this is where Mao, I think, got it wrong. Now, this is, if I could just take a little excursion, because I think about Mao a lot. And we thought about Mao so much when we were doing the celebration of the 100th anniversary. How could a person like Mao, this genius, this courageous man, make such a mistake with the Cultural Revolution? Which seemed to me to have delayed the process of rapid development. Precisely what Mao had said could be done. Mao believed that in 15 to 20 years, China would catch up to the level of industrialization of Great Britain. I mean, he believed that the Chinese people were magical. And to do what he imagined would require the elimination from positions of power and university education, by the way, all of those who were in one another way, according to his thinking, tied to the feudal period. And so he attacks Confucianism, he attacks Buddhism, he attacks everything that he associated with the pre-revolutionary or non-revolutionary stage in Chinese development. So I was thinking, because the way China looks today is not the way Mao would have seen it. He would have even seen a more severe equality. There would not be an elite, an intellectual, technological elite that lived better than the average peasant. Everybody would be on the same level. Clothing would be kind of the same. We used to call them the Mao suits. I used to have them, in fact. Back in my
Are you
days.
gonna wear it tonight?
I don't have it any longer. But could China, with the Maoist philosophy, have rose to where it is today? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it did take a Deng Xiaoping to take a step back and to deal, because Mao was a visionary, a prophetic figure. He didn't care about the details, I don't think, that much. But one thing he got right, that the party of the people and the party of the Chinese state would have to be able to mobilize and win the people to a vision of the future. So the Chinese state is not the liberal bourgeois state, as we have discussed it. And I think that has been very useful for us here. It is a different state that functions for different reasons. Well, the party is 90 million people. I said, wow, that's too many people. But then maybe it isn't. It's according to how it is organized and the different levels of leadership. So maybe it isn't, well, that's, they'll have to decide that. But 90 million people in a population of 1.4, 1.5 billion might not be that many, given that the party must give leadership to every level of society. And leadership is not telling people what to do, it is winning people to a certain ideology, a certain vision. You know what I'm saying? In Western discourse, we think that to be a leader, one, you must be charismatic, and two, you must be able to point your finger and tell people, it's like being a boss. That's what a leader is. There, I think leadership is defined differently. And the reason I think this is that what I saw in looking at Xi Jinping give the speech on the 100th anniversary of the party, he was a leader for the people, a leader from the people. And there's no equivalent of him in the world. And it's not because it's just him, because there's no equivalent of the Communist Party of China in the world. There's no party like it. I mean, we talk about what goes for party and politics over here is like, not even, it's preschool. Not even, you haven't even reached kindergarten. It's like being in political diapers or pampers. This is an advanced concept of politics, an advanced concept of ideology. But then a party that is based upon a high level of knowledge. For instance, you take here in Philadelphia, to say that the Black political class is a bunch of incompetence is to give them a lot of credit. Nothing. It's a disgrace. I'm embarrassed, especially since our mayor and I went to the same university, and I'm not happy with the university either. But, to go through this whole thing of we're going to build an arena in Center City and then have the white man that was really behind the whole thing go down to Maryland and meet without you, a white exclusive meeting, and decide to pull the plug on you and leave you high and dry. Okay. Okay, that kind of machination and manipulation, you can understand. Okay. But you all went so far out on the limb for this arena, and the people never wanted it. Okay, so they pulled the plug on you there. Okay, you got the plug pulled on you with regards to the election, the presidential election. Then you're going to go down and have a so-called rally for the Eagles and can't even spell Eagles. It went nationwide on all the most important cable stations. You spell an eagle, E-E-G, I don't know.
ELGL.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, come on now. But see, I'm saying that is what, or take Biden. The cat was clearly early stages of dementia. He was clearly on medication, both legal and illegal, I would say, because they did find a couple bags of cocaine in the White House. Was so you know you have to consider that. I'm not saying the pipe, but I'm saying they did find some powder. So, but anyway, so this, what I'm saying here, you have a party made up of serious people. If, and this is Alice's question, if the younger generations in China are to be won to the aims of the revolution, there will have to be a communist party. Now, I have to add this, and I know I'm talking, and I'm going to shut up in 1 minute. I got this from Kathy. My whole understanding of I got from you. Your narrative. When she told me that they had outlawed white people teaching Chinese or English in Chinese school, I said, "Oh boy, that's a." See, white people, especially from here, think they can go anywhere in the world, walk in your schools, walk in your church, do whatever they want, and teach and talk trash, and you're supposed to be so happy, and and then you come up in there, I'm teaching English to Chinese children, but then I want y'all to know that I'm a transgender woman. And man, when I heard, now is this accurate? This is accurate what you said, right? That they said that no white person can teach Chinese in a Chinese school or English. Is that true, Kathy?
Well, it was a big thing 10 years ago. You would hear everyone graduate from college, like, I'm off somewhere, I'm off to China to teach English. Now it's really, really, really hard to do that.
I can see that. Just by knowing Chinese over here.
Oh, also not just in Chinese schools, but also the online tutoring and that.
Y'all done shut all that down?
I don't know.
Well, my nephews,
Y'all the only country in the world that has shut the white man down.
I don't know about shut it entirely, but
It's a partial shutdown.
because my niece's English teacher is African American,
Oh,
so they
boy.
brought the blacks. I don't know.
But I think it is one of the most interesting phenomena to protect your country, your society, your children from the internet, and that adults and society are responsible for the children. This is huge. And that's why I think, in many ways, that China is the most advanced society in the world today. And like Du Bois said in 1959 when he spoke there, he said, Africa learned from China. I don't know if Africa has thus far. Okay, let me end on this. The Americans are not quite certain how they're going to respond to this. It is a setback. You'll hear some commentators, and by the way, all these techies with all of their jargon, and you don't know what the hell is going on or what they're saying, and that's purposeful, of course. On one side, they're saying this is existential. The Chinese, they are saying, have more or less won the battle for AI. They're kind of saying that everything that the United States did to sanction China, to keep advanced chips out of China, all of that failed. On the other side, as I mentioned, people are saying, well, it's not that bad. We're still in the game. The fact that DeepSeek has made this app open source and everybody can get it and use it and look at it, which only means that just like with Google, Would you think of doing Yahoo these days? Every search is Google. And in a lot of ways, that this is open source and cheap and inexpensive, free, by the way, means that the world can use it. Where OpenAI was charging something like $200 a month, this is free. You know, which means Africa and Asia and Latin America will have, and they will use the Chinese app, the Chinese language, the Chinese assumption, just like the big thing they all say. Oh, if you want to look up Tiananmen Square in 1989, you can't find it on DeepSeek. In other words, what they're saying is we can't get in there and promote our propaganda. They don't lock, just like in the school, we locked out. We're on the outside looking in. It's very hilarious. Not even Saturday Night Live wants to touch this. I mean, there's a lot of hilarity and comedy that could come out of this, including Trump. Because the day that they announced, I think the day before, he was in the White House, the West Wing, or some room. And yes, here's Sam Altman, and we're going to give up $500 million, $500 billion to build an infrastructure. And we know it's going to take more electricity than most cities use in a year. And so therefore, we're going to get 3 Mile Island. You know where 3 Mile Island, here in Pennsylvania, where a major nuclear fallout accident happened. So we're going up in there, we're going to build, you know, a processor data center. And then we're going to build our own nuclear reactor to produce enough electricity to do all these things. And Trump is down with us, you know, and he's standing up there, you know, like they say, cut the dramatics. And we're going to do this, that, and the other. It's going to be all about us. And we're going to rule the world. We're the gods of the world. And Ayn Rand and Frederick Nietzsche. White man will rule. Get down. They love, by the way, I know you ain't used to this kind of talk. Yeah, but see, the white man love to say, get back, get down, I'm in charge. I'm telling you. And it flipped. You know, there's a rhythm and blues song called Where Do We Go From Here? You know, where do we go from? And see the thing, I'm gonna end on this. You know, as a result of Deng Xiaoping and all, there was a coupling of the Chinese and U.S. economies. China would produce cheaply, United States would buy. Now there's a period of decoupling. That's what the tariff regime is about, to decouple, because the coupling ceased to work to the advantage of the American economy. Even though they had deindustrialized cities, people had lost jobs, and we've studied this here in Philadelphia. But then, will there be a recoupling? Has China decided that coupling with the United States has fewer rewards, and the U.S. elites are so unpredictable that you don't know what they're going to do from year to year? So China is coupling with other nations, like through the BRICS nations, through the Belt and Road, a new architecture of world economic relationships. China, which is by now, I think, the largest economy in the world, if you use PPP, that means purchasing power parity. In other words, don't use the inflation of the United States. You know, United States get 1% actual growth, and the other 2% is inflation. So everything looked like the United States economy is so big and so bad when so much of it is inflationary. But now let us measure China's economy based upon the strength of its currency and what a renminbi or yuan is capable of buying. So in other words, if I go to the supermarket and want to buy a dozen of eggs, that's $6.50. A loaf of bread, $5. You know what I'm saying? I mean, come on. Go to China, a dozen of eggs, 15 cents. Something like that. So you can't compare the countries based upon inflation of the United States and the West and a non-inflationary situation in China, where the currency has remained in its purchasing power about the same over the last 30 years. There is no inflation in China. Can you imagine that? An economy without inflation? Okay, but if you use that measure, PPP, purchasing power parity, China is already the largest economy in the world. If that were not enough, you want to talk about just the 10 leading universities in the world based upon the publication of scientific papers. The 10, 8 of them are Chinese. One is American, Harvard University, and the other white one is Canada. The rest of y'all, like Cambridge and Oxford and all that, that's from the Middle Ages. Don't count. This is not insignificant when we talk about the qualitative leap. And so here we are. I think that all of it kind of confirms what we have said in Free School, the all humanities struggle and such. But I'll end there.
Can I just say some things about artificial intelligence? And I know that some people here work on artificial intelligence, so they can feel free to correct me. I'm infrastructure because my job is in IT, but I'm more interested in the economics of AI. But AI has been around, especially large language models and what's the neural networks has been around since the 80s, and that's when the first papers came out on them. And in the 90s, it was called the AI winter because there was basically no innovation going on in that field. And it's only been recently that AI has taken off because Moore's law, which states that every 1.8 years, the transistor in a silicon semiconductor, the number of transistors will double. And so you finally have the processing power, which is basically, it's saying that we haven't made, what I'm trying to say is that we haven't made any real innovations in artificial intelligence, but rather the hardware has reached a point where it can process that much, and the amount of data that we store has reached the level that you can make predictions. You have basically have the results, and you feed the model the results. But I think I want to go back to the COVID-19 pandemic because
Go back to what?
the COVID-19 pandemic, because one of the commentators talked about China and the COVID-19 pandemic response. And the COVID pandemic was a health crisis, yes, but it was also a financial and supply chain crisis. And it was also a social crisis because it was a crisis of trust in the system. And my takeaway from the COVID-19 pandemic is that you can't remove trade. You cannot remove trade and economic activity from the movement of goods and people. And so what they tried to do during the pandemic was stimulate the economy, but also restrict the movement of people, thereby restricting the movements of goods. Because when goods are exchanged, people need to be there to do the exchange. We're talking about commodities. We're not talking about what you were talking about, Doc, about like paper money or companies being worth something on paper, which is what happened with NVIDIA, where overnight another foreign company reached parity with them, and they lost how many billions of dollars value? I don't know. But
Yeah.
very good with numbers here in preschool. But the COVID pandemic accelerated, what the crisis has done is accelerated the transformation of our economy from a industrial economy and a financialized economy into a data economy, where the most important economic commodity is data. It's no longer oil. And you were talking about the Magnificent Seven or the Seven Sister Companies, and how all of the economic development and growth that has happened since the pandemic has been centralized to these companies because they have access to large sets of data, and because they're the only companies that can really monetize their data. And yeah, so I mainly think about the economics of what's going on and not too much of the artificial intelligence. And what really happened was just an optimization of algorithms so that it could use hardware more efficiently. And but there are all these social questions that are far more interesting about trust in the American economic system, because our money is based off of fiat currency, and there's no guarantee looking into the future. And then finally, the fact that it's open source. Other countries, there's that saying, when China comes to Africa, we get a port. When England comes to Africa, we get a lecture. And when China shares, their AI innovation by making it open source, that's something that I think Elon Musk and Sam Altman had a conflict over when they were both on the Open AI book. And I didn't really dig deep into that conflict because it was too technical for me. But looking back now, that conflict is important because I'm not sure who took what side. But OpenAI, it was disputed. What was it going to be, an NGO, and was it going to have a profit arm, or was it going to be a nonprofit to sort of just drive AI forward for humanity? And yeah, I mean, and finally, I think I use AI every day for work because I don't I input stuff into computers, and it's just a good way to check. So I don't think it'll the way that I heard it described, just in the video, the guy described it as, it won't replace your job, but it'll replace people who don't use AI for the job. But the main takeaway I have from the pandemic is there's no replacing the movement of goods and services. And the stock market, the benefit of the stock market and why China went back to markets was because you need a pricing engine. The Soviet Union, they were relying on their bureaucracy to price out goods for factories. But the stock market takes the work out of that. But after the Bush years and the neocons, how they deregulated speculation in the markets, it's like the stock market doesn't function to price things anymore. And it's almost like the U.S. is in the same crisis as the Soviet Union. You can't figure out the prices of things, and no one believes in your leadership anymore. And that led to the Soviet Union's collapse. But we don't hear many people talking about the imminent collapse of the American empire, having withdrawn from Afghanistan. The stock market is unable to price goods. Failure in ideological leadership. People, I think. New York Times poll came out that said most young people don't believe America is a force for good in the world anymore. So I just wanted to.
Can I just say one thing? I think a lot of people who look at these matters are right knowledge will become the most valuable commodity. The question is, how do you decommodify knowledge? In other words, to make it free. And to make, see, the thing is, I don't want to talk too much, but see, knowledge brings society and humanity closer to that imagined moment where all people are equal. You know, knowledge is a kind of level, and thus the elimination of ignorance gradually, where people can know but don't have to pay for it. See, the West and Sam Altman and them, they're seeing the same thing that we would see, but they're saying, we're going to make you pay. We got to get paid because we will control knowledge and the access to it. DeepSeek said it's free. Everybody. But then you have to have a social structure, social system that educates people so they can, so at least be able to read, what people can't read in this society. I mean, can you imagine? So it will be, that's why they had to control it. OpenAI and all had to control it so they can sell it. You know, and that's why they wanted to hold China back, because the Chinese population is highly educated relative to the Americans and can consume knowledge, have the capacity, the education to consume knowledge. It will be the most important commodity. Maybe it already is, because of the sociological, and the question of modernity. You see, but okay, go ahead.
I am Chinese, and I think I say that because it's the first time I've really verbalized I am Chinese. And it might be because I just came from a conference where it was so white, and I'll go into that in a little bit. But because I'm Chinese, throughout the years, I've gone to China sometimes more frequently than others, and more frequently now. But I remember back in the day, maybe this was when I was 7, so maybe in the early 2000s, you would see commercials on television of Chinese-made cell phones, but it was a joke. No one bought these cell phones. It was very early stages, to now where in China, many people use phones like Huawei or Xiaomi, so forth. And so the technological development is really impressive. And because of the threat that the West sees, you also get a lot of propaganda about it, whether it's DeepSeek, or I don't know if it's still going around, but also how the West essentially accuses China of flooding markets with cheaper goods, such as their cars. So rather than getting a BMW or a Toyota, whatever, it's much cheaper to buy BYD or the other one is, I forget the name, NIO, BYD and NIO. It's much cheaper to buy those cars, and they're just as good as the foreign cars that have historically been in China. And so these technological developments are extremely impressive, but I think for me, I'm more of a sociologist in that whenever I do go to China, I learn a lot from trying to understand the geopolitical, the economic, but always in the back of my mind is, how is it that this population is able to make these achievements? What are the individuals in society like? And I think that's why I really appreciated actually how you framed this as a question of knowledge, how knowledge is seen as the highest value of a society or produced by society, and also what are the knowledge structures.
Yeah.
Because, well, one, going to university in this country like many of the top universities, I can only speak specifically maybe Penn and Cornell, which is that you have all these buildings that are named after individuals. Yeah. Like the celebration. So like Bill Gates. Yeah, Bill Gates, for example, bought a building on our campus, and there's always the reminder of the individual rather than knowledge is produced by society. And it wasn't just Bill Gates, it was also the other buildings. And oftentimes the subconsciously essentially tells students that you are to aspire to be Bill Gates. You are to aspire to be that sole engine of knowledge, or the smartest person. And it does breed a certain arrogance and lack of humility. And that is, and I don't know, like I grew up here, and so I don't know too deeply about what it is exactly in China, but I also already do see differences where, for example, my niece is, I think, 7. And so I talked to my aunt and her parents. Well, one is that people who are uneducated in China, like back then, they still, or even those who don't go to college, because my cousins haven't gone to college, there's still an emphasis on education. Like, even though I may not have gone to college or I may not have been educated, I want my children to be educated. And and the other piece is the respect for teachers, where teachers are really seen as important, where even like parents will try to, gain favor with the teachers and try to understand like what's going on in the classroom, the involvement. And so those things that I hear from my family in China reinforces what you've said. And also, like, even for those Chinese that come to America, like why there's such a, like, in spite of certain conditions, like you said, not necessarily the same as African Americans in this country, but there is that emphasis on education if you can get one in this country. So that's one piece. The other is, I think there is this question of as China develops, like what are to be the values of that society? Because I think generally, like people are getting more educated, but then there's also like the narrative in the West that you have, and even in China, like you have all these people who go to college, but they don't end up being bankers, or they can't get jobs as bankers or tech bros or whatever, right? They end up delivering or making deliveries. And one, I think it is a question of how do you employ such a large society? And does it mean that just because not everyone is going to have an office job that you don't educate people? And I think, so like one is the issue of employment. How do you employ such a vast society? But also it reminds me of what King said. What is wrong with, or it's to make carpenters, men of carpenters and not carpenters of men. So what is, like, is it so wrong that you get a college education, but you also have to do what are called, quote unquote, jobs that are looked down upon in the West? And I mean, I don't know if it's the same in China, but I think because the country has gone through rapid development or development so quickly, there's less of that looking down upon the people who scrub your toilets or, are the, or whatever, like that keeps the city running. And, but then, the other thing about knowledge production is that I think in the West, and I'm not so sure how venture capital plays a role in China. I know at least in the West, like as you were saying, how there's always this thing of these large corporations that have monopolies over certain industries. And I know more so about the pharma industry, but a lot of people go into science or to develop drugs, they start out in smaller biotechs. And the goal is to get bought out by these larger corporations. And at the end, it ends up being marketing rather than actually science. And then that gets into, and that is, I think, one, what is the role of science and knowledge? And it is, I know more intimately here, but I don't think it serves the same role in China, where the innovation or inventions ultimately end up being taken in by these large corporations. For example, Pfizer received a ton of government subsidies during the pandemic, and then all the profits went to Pfizer. But then it's not the same as in China, where there is this pricing, like those companies that are considered like state-owned or state invested, the prices aren't nearly as high as the ones that you get here. And so the investments of the state go back to the people. Then, what was I going to say? Oh, then the issue of, okay, what are the values of the society? Because there is a class that is elite, you know, the Jack Ma's. I think, I don't know if this is true, but someone told me if this is true. His like son goes to NYU or something, and like super wealthy, and not even just him. One, the Communist Party of China knocked Jack Ma down, and he was getting arrogant. He became a cult of personality, blah, blah, blah. But the other challenge is that you do have this rising elite class in China with a ton of money, and what happens of their children. I haven't watched this movie in China, but there was a recent movie that came out, and I don't know how much this says, but the movie was about these two parents who were of that generation that made a lot of money. Their first child was raised in these wealthy conditions, and that kid turned out to be a piece of shit. And so essentially the premise of the whole movie is that then these two parents raise their second child in poverty, knowing and you know that's and I took that movie as an indication of like China grappling, or like the cultural fabric of that society grappling with these questions, which is, yes, you have the technological economic development, but what happens to our children? That arrogance, that comes with money and power, and actually how do you correct that? And it's the same as what King says, you know, the development of technology also needs to be in parallel to moral development. But that movie was an interesting anecdote. I saw that and I was like, oh, really interesting. Then the last piece is what you spoke to in the beginning, which is this white supremacist system. I was recently in this, I think being in Philadelphia and being in free school, you can sometimes forget that it is much more white supremacist, like not in the, because you're Asian, I'm going to, or you're a different color or a different race, because there's this false perception that, oh, I don't care about that you're Chinese, I don't care that you're Indian, or I don't care, so as long as you're white, or you believe in certain standards. Meaning, I was at this conference in Las Vegas for 5 days, and it was predominantly white. I think there were like 2 other like Asian women there, and it was disgusting, which is one, I think people work for these, being in corporate, people work for these corporations, and there's a default of either hypocrisy or humor, or not hypocrisy, or just making a joke of it. One is the hypocrisy is if you're too serious about believing in the vision of a farmer, right, which is bringing science to people, bringing curing certain diseases, you're seen as a fraud, because people also, like the people who work as part of it, know how corrupt it is actually in bringing these innovations or to patients. And so the way that they deal with it is it becomes a joke, where instead of being serious, like either being hypocritical, you make it a joke. You try to be engaging, you try to be fun, all this stuff. And so it was suffocating being there, because you either had to be one of those two things. Complete lack of, I mean, we were in Las Vegas, the casinos, so forth. But then I was observing this Chinese woman, Chinese American woman. She's probably maybe like early 30s, mid 30s. And, you know, we had a side conversation, and she had said, you know, Happy Chinese New Year. And I was like, oh, this is my break, because usually, I don't know, like, I think Chinese in America, you default to talking about white things, which is like your job, your nothing really to say, oh, like, we're talking because we're Chinese, or I don't want to be seen by these white people, these 2 Chinese women together. And so I was surprised when she was said Happy Chinese New Year. And so we talked about, I mean, free school is having a dinner afterwards too, but you know, she talked about what she was making, blah, blah, blah. She talked about growing up like learning Chinese because her father worked in industry, would travel in engineering between China and America, so forth. But then I would see her interact with other people and I would see her present, and she was a joke, in the sense of like using humor to not be too serious. And it shook me because, and it's probably how I act in corporate America too, which is, or else you end up driving yourself crazy. But she was on stage and she was trying to be, engaging and fun. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm actually like what happened to dignity? And it just made me really sad. And I think I elaborate on that because people assume that we're in a raceless society, and that you won't be targeted because you're of a different color. But there are certain standards to which you behave and carry yourself. But then I also thought of my mother, because I think my mother is insecure about the fact that she works in the kitchen in a school. And she's always like, you're more educated than I am, blah, blah, blah. But I prefer 100 times I'd choose my mother over this woman that I met. Because my mom, she's honest, and I think sometimes too honest, and because of that gets bullied by other people. But she's honest, she says what she thinks, she does what is right. In the school, people don't wash, and it becomes an ethic as part of working in America, which is that you feel like, why should I clean the floors? Like, what does it do for me? Or why should I go out of, she works in the school. And so she's like, no, it's not my job to mop the floors, but I'll just do it anyways because, I'm here, blah, blah. Or to take the extra step to make sure that the apples are cut for the children because they're younger. And so I thought about, I thought about this woman that I had met, and then I thought about my mother, because both have the inheritance of being Chinese, but then so different. But I guess I say that because one, knowledge as an equalizer, and then also how knowledge and as part of different social systems made all the sense, because is it knowledge that makes people more dignified and more equal and more free, or is it knowledge that actually is made for, or is used for profit and with assumptions that are white?
Yeah.
But it was very helpful because I was trying to make sense of all this that I've been thinking about over the past week. So yeah, I'll there.
Go ahead, Neil.
Well, yeah, a lot happened this week, and I think I have a lot of thoughts, but I think basically this question of knowledge is really important because I feel like in the U.S., knowledge is only valuable if it creates profit. And so the best way to evaluate the value of knowledge is how much money it makes.
That's right.
And I think that's why the NVIDIA stock market drop was so shocking, because finally it registered in a way that actually means something to a lot of Americans or a lot of the elite. Whereas I feel like in China, or what DeepSeek shows, or I think is showing, is that knowledge is not just market value or how much you sell your product for. That's not the value of knowledge. The value of knowledge is actually what impact does it make on the world? What does it uplift people? And I feel like because I think a lot of what you were saying actually kind of made me think about AI a little bit differently, where because in the US it's so propagandized as basically the last or the new frontier of white supremacy, it made me really think negatively about AI, where I was like, oh yeah, as a technology, if it's just the next crutch for the West to assert its dominance, then I'm anti-AI. And I know it's more it's always been more nuanced than that, where okay, China has been using AI in a lot of things. And I think the question is what is the role or the purpose of it? And I also think it's important to kind of decouple the propaganda that the West has been using around AI with the actual like possibilities of the technology and the knowledge itself. But I also think that the dependence on AI and like what Trump was doing with like the $500 billion like act was also kind of insane, because basically the whole point of that is like, oh, the US wants to maintain its dominance in AI and in chips specifically by basically having a monopoly. And it's fine if it like, I don't know, contributes to like climate crisis or like using a lot of electricity and basically funneling electricity in like these data processing centers from like all the other needs of the world. But I feel like for DeepSeek, the fact that it uses much less computing power and it actually is not reliant on supposedly the cutting edge chips that were supposed to define the future, I feel like is important, because the source or the ability of that innovation, I think, does come from like the knowledge clusters. Where I was reading like an interview from, I think,
Could you say that just the source or the?
or like basically the reason why China was actually able to accomplish it is not, because of Moore's law and like simply just scaling, like brute forcing like technological process. But I feel like it's actually from revising like the assumptions of like, how do we solve this problem? And is it a problem that can only be solved by like having like 50,000 or however many thousand GPUs? And like, I think the philosophy of DeepSeek, the founder, I think, hired only Chinese, like local talent. And they also did not look that much at the elite credentials, where they didn't care. Like, it didn't matter if they were trained in the West. It also didn't matter how many years they'd spent in like the AI industry or whatever. Like, there were college recent graduates, and I think like even PhD students, and like people with like very little technical work experience. But actually the value was like, okay, like, are you passionate? Are you like actually capable of like thinking about things in a fresh way from like the actual logic of how things should make sense? And it was like that was really interesting to me. And I think also the philosophy was that in like the interview, it was like also interesting because there was like the China Academy with like Thinkers Forum. They had translated one of the interviews, which was like from earlier, like it wasn't a recent interview really, but it was like the top 50 AI talents potentially might not be in China, but it's the belief in the capacity of like the correct environment or infrastructure nurturing talent to still be able to like disrupt or to innovate. And yeah, I just think that it is a different value system. And those different values like nurture very different results. But I also really liked what you were saying about like the preconditions, like the qualitative preconditions that shape like the quantitative or the results that basically we're able to observe. And I feel like it's an interesting way of thinking about social science. And I think like us seeking knowledge also, because partially like because we're in America and because so much propaganda exists to try to distort our view of China and we're not on the ground, I feel like we're only able to notice or to basically see like very massive like quantitative developments. And I feel like the question is how to interpret it, where I feel like there have been a lot of these too, like with DeepSeek, and even I think recently Americans getting banned from TikTok and then going on like Xiaohongshu and then seeing like people's lives in China and like being like, oh wow, like actually I've been kept from a lot of the knowledge. Like I was also looking at it and like there are a lot of like self-driving electric vehicles in China that are like really advanced, and there's no way for I think Americans to like generally see it or to like, and so basically we're only really able to be exposed to like these very vast like results. But I think it basically asks the question, like what are the preconditions that actually allow for this? And I think it's also like one of the other like big differences I think between the West, like Western logic, which is like, how can we monopolize? Like, how can we decouple? How can we isolate it and keep this thing like just for ourselves? And that's the only way that we can possibly like stay on top. And I feel like it is, like a white supremacist ideology, which is that only a few can win, and therefore we must keep other people at the bottom. And I feel like the logic of like China, like, and it's stated like explicitly more win-win, which is that
Absolutely.
we develop this technology. It's open source. Like
The whole
everybody, like
society.
actually everything, like all the boats will be lifted, and even the U.S. like, punitive attempts to keep certain things for themselves is actually an opportunity for China to then connect better with the rest of the world, to like build like a common sense of values. Because even like I think NVIDIA and like Biden, one of his last acts, I think, was to basically cap the number of chips or the amount of computing power that other countries could purchase. And so it was in 3 tiers, where the first tier is basically all of the Western European nations, and then like Japan and maybe not Japan, but like South Korea and Taiwan. And so it's like the Western countries and like the safe neo-colonies who can purchase however much they want. And then there's a second tier, which is like much more capped. And those are like other countries. And then the third tier is basically the countries that do not just go along with whatever the US says. And it was interesting because this was another article on the China Academy thing, but they were basically celebrating where it's like, oh, like actually if the US wants to do this, then they're just digging their own grave.
Yes.
Because this encourages like those countries to also work with China. And it also like basically makes NVIDIA obsolete in a lot of ways. And so I just think like this win-win or like mutual cooperation or the uplift of all of humanity is like the antidote in some ways to like white supremacy, or like the opposite of white supremacy. And then also what you were saying about like how you see China and like the education system and the values and the idea that knowledge can actually contribute something to society. And then also if you value knowledge and you value the younger generation, those two things go together. It made me think a lot about like Du Bois and the immortal child.
Yes.
And I think like what he was outlining, where basically he sees the possibility of a future that's better. And like if you want a better future, like you basically have to believe in the youth, and you have to actually like invest in human beings. And so it was really moving, I think, to think about the ideal of what Du Bois was writing in The Immortal Child, and how it actually like possibly can play out even in like such a massive society and like the world today. So yeah, just really exciting.
You talked about a couple of articles. Could you?
Oh yeah,
Just share them, please.
Yeah, it was really.
You dropped a lot of knowledge. I'm sorry, Jerry. Oh, Eddie. Go ahead.
Oh man, I've been thinking about this DeepSeek even before last free school, man. I spend a lot of time reading this AI stuff, and this I guess algorithmic achievement of China both highlights and exacerbates the crisis of white civilization, Western modernity, as well as highlights the possibilities of a human future.
Highlights the possibilities of
And so, like for example, I won't go into the specifics of the algorithm development but they were able to achieve something that the West has been struggling with and has not succeeded in. So when you train these AI models, there's like, you could say there's like 2 critical steps, like supervised fine tuning, where they like give a bunch of like handcrafted examples, and that teaches the AI to basically mimic human behavior. But it's mostly copying. And then there's like the reinforcement learning step, where they try to get that to generalize, and basically copying and then generalizing this human behavior. They test these AIs on a benchmark of questions, a suite of questions. And then depending on how it scores, it says, oh, we achieved a certain level of intelligence, human intelligence and reasoning. I think these are dubious claims, but this is just what they say. They were able to remove this step where they have the AI just copy the human examples and just have it basically answer questions and receive like a reward or score from another AI to teach the model. So basically you have one AI teaching another AI, and they hope to achieve what you call super intelligence, an AI that can exceed human capabilities by not copying humans, but having an AI learn from another AI. Okay, so they've been able to get AI to play better chess or Go or Dota, board games and video games, that better than human beings like this. But an ability to do math or think or reason or know the world I don't believe an AI will ever achieve that, no matter what algorithmic developments occur.
Why not?
This world, this epistemology of knowing the world, I don't think an AI even has the capability. And we've tried to make sense of it with Hegel and the science of logic, where you have like there's like categorical thinking or other stuff that is
Can I just ask you a question? This is very interesting because, you know, what they talk about in general AI is super intelligence that would literally turn men into gods, a machine into gods. But you say that, and so you wouldn't need human beings at all, not even to, that computers or machines would teach other machines, and the software would be invented by the machines. This is,
yes, that's what they want.
yeah, okay. Well, I was going to ask you, so how do you define thinking or intelligence? I know you use the concept of categorization, thinking through categories. That's one form of reasoning. But I just wanted, if you would just, I mean, it's easy to say that it won't do it, or that the human being is still necessary, but you have to say why.
I know. That's the hard part, Rob.
And there's a good article about this, not to cut you off, but Chomsky, who's a renowned linguist, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times as OpenAI was becoming more normalized. He talks about the limits of AI, and I'm not going to claim to be more familiar or on top of like the details of AI, but one of the things that I think he may have talked about was this issue of AI's ability to produce knowledge is all based on the copying of existing human knowledge. And if that's the case, and it makes me think a lot about just coming from, I would say, maybe spending more time in creative realms, spiritual realms a bit. Like the Einstein quote, which is like, I didn't arrive at the discovery of E equals MC squared based on the achievements of my rational mind alone. Like the idea that you can even achieve a super intelligence solely through rationality. That's an assumption that even around this table, we talk about being like philosophical materialists, think to a degree, but that is a contradiction. And maybe and that goes hand in hand with supporting an individualism that worships the rational mind. And so I think that's one of the breaks, and maybe DeepSeek in producing an AI model that can use other AI to train it could achieve some sort of super intelligence faster. But that's one of the boundaries that I'm not ever sure a artificial intelligence could ever understand. I don't think artificial intelligence could ever be a Duke Ellington or a Ben Holiday or any great jazz musician, because those individuals never created something solely based on their rational mind alone. And that's the inherent human element in it. And so I do think one of the interesting things, despite whatever limitations there are, any artificial intelligence to achieve what is something I think truly beautiful about humanity, despite all that, what I do think is very interesting and exciting about this moment is what Thomas Kuhn would call paradigm shift. And what we've said around this table that makes me think of that is the idea that like, most paradigm shifts in the advancement of human knowledge that he would indicate are like in contradiction to the existing systems of power of the time. So Galileo, understanding that, coming upon the idea of relativity, right? That's something that like, challenged the existing norm and belief system of the geocentric.
Michael, could I ask you a question? This is Eddie too, because would you say that the definition of human intelligence, let us say, that AI people have, is based upon the development of human intelligence where it is now, without the assumption that human intelligence might take a leap forward if the social conditions for it exist. In other words, they're saying the rational human being thinks like this, however you want to define it. But that's the rational human being who has developed to this point, generally. But then the rational human being in what kind of social environment? Well, one, European modernity, and so on. We don't, my only point is, do we really know what human intelligence, just as rational intelligence, what it could be? Is it now what it is capable of, or has it been limited by the nature of the social structures, the societies, colonialism, capitalism, etc.? And is a whole new human being out there waiting to be born? That's why I say that China might, represent. But what do you think of it?
So, I mean, I can tell you how these people see the capacity of the human being because I've been to OpenAI's offices.
Yeah.
I've worked with these people before.
Yeah.
And you're in the middle of San Francisco, and there's you have to kind of swim through a sea of homeless people who are suffering on the street to get to the office. They have windows that are blurred so you can't see what's going on. They bring you breakfast, lunch, and dinner so you don't have to leave the office. And all you do is talk about theoretical aspects of AI. So these people that are supposedly even creating human super intelligence don't even have a worldview that can even account for and deal with the problems of their own society, in their own city, in their everyday life. And they're not even trying to. They are hoping that this AI will be able to go past what currently exists. And that will resolve the contradictions of society.
That's
and we're not even able to
see, that's the epistemological question in its broadest, because the question of what is the human being? Remember, not the rational individual, but the human being. And these knowledge clusters that are only in their infancy in China, let us say, suggest something about human intelligence that does not default to the individual.
Right.
But I'm just saying, but go ahead, that's it.
No, I'm digesting that, man. You're dropping heavy bombs.
Drop the bomb on you. That's a song about Gap Bag. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I don't know. No, I have only off that point about the social manifestation of knowledge clusters.
Yeah.
And
I said the social conditions of knowledge. But go ahead.
well, conditions, but also how it manifests.
Okay, well, I'm sorry.
Too, because I mean, but yeah. Well, just going back to what you had said, that's what taught me as the difference between the Chinese state and how the party, like how you explain the party of the people, why that is not the liberal bourgeois state.
Yes.
That either exists now in America. I'm not quite sure, actually, but that, and then I just wanted to raise that as it involves itself with the question of thought and how.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just think it's interesting. But you say more because I'm not.
Well, I wanted, that's also what stuck out to me from your framing, and that I wanted to go back to this category, or that language of the knowledge cluster.
The knowledge cluster.
The knowledge cluster, because I think the way you have framed it is okay, preschool and similar represent one sort of a genesis of the knowledge cluster, and imagine if knowledge could be produced its way across society.
Absolutely.
Flourishing and democratic change that we produce. And you compared it to what happens in the Chinese state and how
like you're beginning to see a new epistemology arise that is based on the assumption of colored modernity and not white modernity. But I don't, because you also said this thing where you were like, knowledge clusters become great force. I think in historical movements or movements toward freedom. And there's something that I'm trying to flesh out there because I've never been that interested in AI, like very different background from you. But there was something I was trying to say about AI. Oh, I got distracted.
No, you're talking about clusters in the social conditions for knowledge, which I think begins to answer the question or to find a solution to the question that Eddie put on the table. He said, I don't believe in what they're saying. I said, but why don't you believe? And he said, that's the more difficult question. And so, yeah, go ahead.
Well, just one quick thing. The point I wanted to finish on is like, Mary, I thought that was interesting. You said, this is also what I got from your remarks, so the important thing that I take away from DeepSeek is like, okay, something has been unveiled, or something has shifted in the practice.
Yes, yes.
Where like, I think that's actually a huge deal because I looked it up on the news while you were talking. For Sam Altman to say like, oh, I think we've been on the wrong side I think OpenAI has been on the wrong side of history in terms of us making a decision to not open source, like our knowledge.
He's saying now they were wrong.
He said we feel that we've been on the wrong side of history. Like,
Did you say
just from,
Because I thought,
well, I think what's important is that OpenAI can no longer be what it was. Yeah. And I think he's smart enough to recognize that and realize that, like, okay, they can't be like the hegemon in, the technology space anymore. Like,
Yeah. Do you think he believes that?
well, that's not my main point. I don't think that's the main point. I think that it's more that he's forced. Like something in his thinking, something in his choices is now forced. Like by the leaps that like China has made, or the way that China has entered, like the chessboard, right? But then when you were married, when you were also talking about how like people going to Xiaohong, like the little red book Chinese app and saying like, whoa, this is how China lives, or like Chinese people live, and something has been kept from me, which is basically my providence with the rest of the world. Like it does make me think back to how young Americans especially the students reacted to the genocide in Gaza, and how even after the ceasefire, I think people are still very much trying to find a way, especially the young generation, to say like, I see something I didn't see before, and what is my role in like this universal brotherhood? Because something about what you said with knowledge clusters also makes me think of what the shape of that fourth American Revolution will take, and how it's gonna involve China, it's gonna involve Gaza, and I'm not exactly sure how it will be connected, but that's a significant thing I take away about the AI rupture, right? Like it like forges certain linkage between the Chinese people and the American people who are interested in freedom. Like, yeah.
Well, I feel like part of what's really interesting and complicated about this whole AI thing is also, I guess what you raised is, I feel like we often talk about the uniqueness of the American revolutionary process, but at the same time, obviously America is not an island and it is not divorced from the rest of the world. And I think part of even how we might understand the third American Revolution is that it was, I guess this is my interpretation, but that Black people especially were so motivated by seeing essentially this like freedom explosion around the world with the world entrepreneurial struggle. And that's like literally, it's like knowledge of the world then propels like what becomes the civil rights movement. And you can even see like the kind of essence of the civil rights movement itself is kind of obviously, yes, a social movement, but also like this battle of, or a confrontation of ideologies and of ideas and of like literally like, how do people know each other in society? Like how do, for instance, like white people know Black people and vice versa, in which basically like the mode of nonviolence was actually one, forging a new kind of social relationship, but also
An ideological
an
relationship.
ideological relationship between, or it creates the possibility for a new ideological relationship.
Yeah, right.
One amongst Black people themselves, but
Right.
also between White and Black.
Absolutely.
So I think that's an interesting part of it. But I think I guess what I've been thinking about related to this AI thing is that it's in very negative ways. I feel like AI has been, and just this question of big tech in general, like how it has impacted like even what we call the social contract in the United States, because like you said, like $1 trillion just like vanished from the stock market overnight. And it's like, where did that money come from? Like literally, like where did that money come from? Where is it like, and it's like this whole thing of like fictitious.
It wasn't
Yeah,
money.
it's fictitious capital.
It was valuation.
Yeah, valuation.
Yeah, and then, so it was. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Right. And so I think like but the kind of scary thing about it is I do think technology, and this is part of what I was trying to get at last week, even in talking about like, Trump, his relationship with all these big tech people, which I don't see it as just like a simple thing. And I actually do think it's like there's an ideological question at the heart of it, and a social question at the heart of it, in terms of being like Trump and his vision for the future, all that stuff. But part of it is that, like, okay, let's say you have like 50% of the American population have like 401ks, right? Where they're invested in the stock market in some way, because basically we don't have retirement, like pension funds anymore. And like literally part of the American social contract is that you see your future as like being connected to like the growth of the American stock market. And it's like the American stock market basically for the past, like, let's say like 5 years has seen AI as essentially what will lead to American growth of the American GDP and of the American economy,
Or at
because
least of the stock market.
of the stock market. But this is again tied to basically like whether people don't have like a retirement fund or not. And it's like, okay, like the growth of like the American stock market and like all these finance companies like Wall Street have bet on big tech as being the solution to American dominance and American growth in the American economy. And they bet on those tech companies because of AI. In particular, this, especially like, let's say NVIDIA, the whole, I don't know if I'm getting this correctly, but like Jevons paradox or whatever, of like basically like the whole bargain around AI was that in order for AI to advance, you need exponential increases in computing power. And basically that computing power is monopolized by, like one company, which is NVIDIA, because they're the only ones who design these chips, which are specifically capable of processing AI. And it's not just that you need those kinds of chips, you need like huge magnitudes of them, which is also why they invested like $500 billion in the data centers. But basically, like that has been, so it's like if you look at, okay, like the future of these big tech companies, it's dependent on AI, and it's dependent on essentially like this whole even paradigm around AI being tied to, like, let's say like NVIDIA being tied to like the kind of exponential increase of computing power, which is also OpenAI's model, which is like they became dominant because they're like able to like, like Sam Altman's for it's like 10x, right? It's like basically we're just going to like the more we can increase computing power, basically the more dominant our AI model can be. And I think basically DeepSeek came along, or like actually they shattered the entire paradigm, which is why the stock market basically dropped by $1 trillion in valuation, because they're like, oh, actually like NVIDIA's whole reason for existing and its whole value proposition, like its whole valuation, is based off of the idea that you will continually need more computing power, exponential more computing power, in order to advance AI. And then DeepSeek's whole model was like, no, actually, you don't need that. And like basically, they use like my understanding is like they use like older NVIDIA chips, which also raise the question like, oh, like, do you need the NVIDIA chips in order to do this kind of AI like modeling and stuff? Or could you use, for instance, like Chinese like semiconductor technology? So like all of that's on the table. But I think the other part of it that I was like at least listening to with like the Wall Street Journal and how they talked about it is that both part of it is the, like, for instance, the Biden administration and also Trump imposing these export controls on like the semiconductor technology to China, is that on the one hand, it's like very ideological. It is about like trying to maintain U.S. specifically like U.S. supremacy in artificial intelligence as being like a kind of marker of like white supremacy of white civilization, but also like literally like the Biden administration has been doing that because they say it's a national security thing, because they see AI like literally as a kind of like as akin to like the atomic bomb, because you think that you can use AI to like open this completely new field of like warfare, basically. And that's part of the reason why they were trying to shut down like China's ability to develop AI with using these semiconductor chips. Because it's not just that the semiconductors themselves are obviously like the most crucial like physical enabling technology for the development of like AI, but also just like the digital world. But that it's also like you need like their Biden like and maybe Trump also, they see AI as like we need to use this in order to like basically have a technological edge on China, especially if you're leaving open the possibility of like actual like kinetic war with China.
Or can I just say this? Ideological war.
Yes, ideological, but I think they are preparing for physical war.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Right.
But the reason I just wanted, and I think you would agree with this. You see, in China is relatively an open society. It really is compared to the United States. It's a freer society. And so therefore, with a highly educated population, ideas are very critical. In other words, people who are educated are more sensitive to ideas. And if I can penetrate your culture, for example, take the queer movement. It has no material base in China, but I can impose it in China, by associating it with a number of things that Chinese people like, such as modernity, such as education, so whatever. And so I think, yes, to destabilize societies, if not China, India, if not India, Iran, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, because I think the other part of it that I've been thinking about of like even like technology and like the social contract in the United States is that like I do think that like social media, like big tech has changed the way that people relate, like obviously receive information, but even like your perception of the world is like, yeah, like let's like both in the positive sense, like we would never be able to like actually know what's going on in Gaza if not for social media. Like I think that is objectively true.
Right.
But also on the other hand, like I do think that this is, I guess, like there is a lot of I feel like a lot of competing debates around, okay, like social media as like actually like social engineering, which I feel like we've talked about before. But I do think that like it's like part of the reason why I do think that like, because I guess this came up last week, but like I do think that Silicon Valley and big tech are part of the ruling class in this country.
I agree.
And part of that it's because social media has become like it literally has become part of how we conceptualize the public square, and yet it's monopolized by all these companies basically. And I think that they have a lot of influence over basically like what shapes discourse and how discourse unfolds, and even how the consciousness of people and how they
that's
feel.
right, and thus identity.
Right. Yeah.
It's very,
and social media has shaped the people.
that's right. And you think about it. Think about China. China is, I would say, the Chinese population is very vulnerable for the reason that they're very strong. I mean, in other words, the education. They're highly educated. They value education, and they value their history, at least the modern history. So all of that makes them more vulnerable.
Right. But the interesting thing is that you see the contradiction in philosophies of epistemology is in that, like, for instance, in the U.S., basically AI has actually, I feel like it's actually disrupted education, where it's like it's actually it's kind of destroyed education in a way, because you have like all these kids, one who went through COVID. But also, it's like, especially in like colleges, I feel like the big problem these days is that you have kids who are like don't want to write essays, and you're basically asking AI to like write essays for them. Like they're not listening in lectures because they're basically using AI to take notes for them. And like it has basically changed like the way that education unfolds. But then like the difference in like the Chinese model is that their whole paradigm, like their whole like philosophy towards it is not to use to like that AI is going to destroy education, but that AI becomes an actual tool that enables like actual advancement of not just education in China, but also like Nuri brought up, the whole thing is like the reason why this is open source is so that, yeah, like there can be like literally like the global south can use AI in a positive sense as a tool and not in a way that also like, because the whole thing, like Sam Altman recently, he made headlines, but he was saying that like AI is going to change the social contract in the United States. And they like, yeah, they think in these terms, like these big tech people, they think in these terms, in part because like they're like, yeah, like, okay, like if AI forces redundancy on a large part of the American workforce, like they're the ones who are like, okay, we're like, we want to be the ones to control it. And like, we're the ones who want to define what the new social contract is. But then when you remove the control of the technology itself from these big tech companies and from these kind of like ubermensch people like Sam Altman, and you actually make it accessible to the entire world and to the people, then like it changes the way that like people can relate to it. But I guess the last thing I want to bring up is recently I came across this interview with Deng Xiaoping in 1980. And it's interesting because it's like, I guess, kind of in the threshold of opening up and all that stuff and kind of coming on with the Cultural Revolution, where Deng Xiaoping makes an interesting argument or observation that actually the way that he kind of interpreted a lot of Mao and the Cultural Revolution and even like the Great Leap Forward and stuff is rather than even seeing it as like, even though it had the language of like, oh, we're going to leap into socialism, actually Deng's interpretation is that Mao, especially this whole thing of like cult of personality and like kind of Mao's approach on the negative sides of it, is that he actually sees it like Mao being very feudalistic, actually. Which is he uses the word feudal. Like he's like obviously like, I'm never going to detract from Mao as the founder of New China. And he's like he has this interesting formulation of like Mao, it's like we see it at like 70-30, where it's like 70% of Mao is these positive contributions and 30% is like what we see is like negative. But like obviously the positive outweighs the negative. But he's like, if Mao had these negative qualities, it's actually that he was feudalistic without realizing it. And like basically he thought that like we could impose these things. But then so the interviewer who's Italian asked him, so like, because talking about introducing capitalism and stuff, and Deng is like, actually, like if we're comparing feudalism and capitalism, capitalism is more progressive. And he also says, yeah, like, or do you mean to say, so the interviewer asks, do you think that capitalism isn't so bad after all? And Deng says, it depends on the way you look at it. In any case, it's better than feudalism. We cannot say that all of the things that have been developed in capitalist countries are of a capitalist nature per se. Technology, for example, and science, these are ways of managing the economy, which is another science in itself. And these do not bear the stigma or the kind of hard association of being classist. And we intend to learn these things from you, the West, in order to aid us in our construction of a socialist society. And basically he's saying that like what China was trying to do in that period of opening up was not to become capitalist, but basically to learn, let's say, techniques of management, techniques of like actual science, which I think is like all the stuff that we're seeing now in China of like basically outcompeting the West in science is like the result, the fruit of that, where it's like, yeah, like science itself is not capitalist. Like, and so part of like Deng's whole approach was like, actually, like we're going to learn.
Yeah, the concept technology is neutral or ideological free, which might not be true.
Well, it might not be true, but like it doesn't necessarily have to be capitalist, or it doesn't have to necessarily be organized in a certain way, which I think is very interesting. But I don't know, I just wanted to bring that up because I feel like we are kind of seeing the fruits of all this.
Hey, Doc, can I mention something? I was thinking about what Alice had said earlier, like you're interested in people that make up China, or what you had said that reminded me of Nuri saying like the fresh ideas, or like because like I think also now I'm thinking about how important, like I'm trying to work out something, but I'm interested in a lot. A part of me also is like, well, dang, like I want to go to China. Like I want to see what are the qualities that these people are exhibiting. I want to know how people refer to things or each other or see the world. As it relates to your point about achieving a new stage in the struggle against white supremacy. Because in my mind, when you brought up the question, Eddie, of like, AI, is it able to produce not just super knowledge, but just like, is it able to evolve? I forgot exactly how you worded it. And Doc was like, well, why not? And you said that was the difficult part. A part of me, I was like, well, why is that the difficult part to justify how a computer or like a whole system of understanding knowledge and technology can evolve. Because a part of me was like, I don't understand. I have limited understanding of the debates about knowledge and life in these circles, other than cultural phenomena or scientific phenomena or whatever. But I do know that what enables me to know is also something about what enables me to be free. Or like, I feel like a conclusion that I had was that I want to be free and I want to struggle against white supremacy. So that kind of unlocks a new window of being, of seeing the world or whatever. I only bring that up because I'm like, well, I don't know if an AI would want to be free, but I don't think that's kind of the point of the discussion. Like, I'm actually less concerned about AI as like as this as, and I'm more concerned about what you had said, Alice, about the people of China that, like you're raising, Doc, are creating avenues of struggle to be able to both defend or make an offensive out of something that hadn't existed before. In this case, against white supremacy. In this case, against an age of modernity that locks the human being to the individual. Because we're also talking about like new ways that knowledge even exists in of itself. I wouldn't want knowledge to be a commodity, nor do I expect knowledge to be a commodity. So why is knowledge a commodity? And a part of those questions that I have personally about how these things could develop in the state that we have as America, as it functions, to create either data or create some type of industry that like refuses human or like doesn't allow human beings to be human or whatever it is that this elite want to imagine the world to be. I'm more concerned about the Chinese people and because I feel like what we're talking about is new knowledge, a new understanding, a new human being, almost literally taking place. And I'm also interested in what you had said about modernity, meaning that if there's a new, what creates the modern period? I think we said before is also the struggle for freedom. And I think, or like to the extent that, I don't know, like, that, I mean, yeah, that needs to be explained for sure. But
Yes.
like, Michelle, your point about how different this revolutionary process is, I think,
Repeat that again, how what?
what I mean is that in addition to how Mao wouldn't see the China that exists now back then, I'm not quite sure Martin Luther King would be able to see the America that exists or see the world that exists entirely as it is now. Meaning all of its contradictions, all of the forces that create.
But they're different.
Right,
they're very different. And I think for the reasons that Deng Xiaoping said about Mao, he was still held in the grip of certain feudal ideas of hierarchy, of, et cetera, how things are done. I don't think Martin Luther King was bound in the same way to a previous historical moment. Now, Afrocentrists want to take us back there. It's, you know what I'm saying? But Martin Luther King was, in fact, almost a completely modern man. Is it? Okay, go. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, yeah, but that's the reason why I bring Alice's point back up, because I'm like, I know we're in a different like the time. I'm concerned about the time that we're in now, and I think that like we're honing in on what it is, what its contradictions, what moves it, what really moves it, or what defines the revolutionary struggle. I'm not quite sure.
Because I feel like people, because we brought up like the China conference we did a few years ago, and I think people would be like, yeah, like why did you guys organize a conference celebrating the 100th anniversary of the founding?
Makes a lot of sense.
Of the Communist Party of China. And I do think that even if we're thinking about like what does the revolutionary process look like in this day, and like how would a revolution like even like what would it mean and how would it unfold in the United States today? I do think that we're onto something in the sense that today, for instance, like maybe on the surface, if you're like, because yeah, I've been using DeepSeek, like I've been using it for work. I've also been using Alibaba's AI thing, Plan. But it's like, on a surface level, obviously Americans are like interested in China, but they may only see it as like, oh, I'm only interacting with Chinese products, Chinese technology. And that in itself is like partially a whole thing where it's like, yeah, like Americans are completely cut off from like this whole world of, yeah, like what Alice brought up, like, yeah, basically China dominates the electric vehicle market. Like you have all these Chinese phones, which are vastly superior to American phones, but which Americans, yeah, they're very, like, they're much better.
Yeah, I mean, it's, because I think China, it's much more creative when you see the cars and phones. There's like a 3-panel phone.
Right.
And
but I think I think that there's it's like on this like even on the superficial, yeah, like Americans are interested in China. And I think that basically the past like couple of years have shown that Americans are interested in China once you kind of take the veil off of like this whole anti-communist, like anti-China propaganda and stuff. But I think there's a mistake of just seeing it as like, oh, Americans are only interested in like Chinese technology or like how nice Chinese trains are or like how cool Chinese buildings are, which is like they are cool. But I think actually what Serafina's raising, which I think we are talking about, is like once you get beyond that, are Americans interested in the Chinese people? And then, like, even when you're talking about something like DeepSeek, it's not just the intervention of Chinese technology on American society. It is the intervention of actually Chinese civilization, of the Chinese people in the overall social and ideological landscape of the United States. And I think this is part of how we have to understand, like, okay, like, what does, if there's an American revolutionary process, which we're trying to understand and be part of and contribute to, it has to be understood as like not something which is self-contained to the American people or to the American context, but as something which is like constantly you're having the world, humanity itself, like basically intervening and entering into how we understand the ideological makeup and landscape of the American people, in which the American people are interested in the rest of the world. And the question is like, can they basically move beyond this veil which has been imposed on Americans and actually see the rest of humanity for what it is, and have that actually be part of what propels the revolutionary consciousness of the American people forward in this time. But I think this has to be considered as like not something which is a closed system, actually something which is open and like that needs to become open, which is why it's like basically like 5 years, like however many years ago, when we do a conference about China, people might think that we're crazy, but actually no, we are trying to actually figure out something which is like how do you figure out an American revolutionary process which is in concert and deeply connected, and actually in constant conversation with the rest of humanity. And this is something which people are now figuring out, but I feel like we have been trying to work this out for a long time. And it's like we're not just like people who admire China from a distance, but actually
I
this
think-
is something which appears directly in what propels American history
I
forward.
think you could say the same thing about Korea
Right.
and the Korea conference. I really do. Especially a civilization of peace and yada, 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 you know.
Well, that's the question, because I think, Jeremiah, what you were raising earlier is that in America, there's such a dominance of, or propaganda through these social media networks. And I think the question is the idea, or is the consciousness of the people going to be dictated by what is determined proper and allowed by, I don't know, your Facebooks, your Twitters. And I think in free school study of the consciousness of the people, it is a question, which is how is it that the youth that are raised, for example, the youth that are raised on these platforms, engineered to think a certain way about the world. But it does, like with, I don't know, I think with like Xiaohongshu or DeepSeek, it opens another avenue for people of America to know the world, including China. I think even with the study of China, sometimes I have to be conscious too, where am I studying China because I'm Chinese, or am I studying China because I'm American? And that there's the general of how societies develop and how people develop, but then there's also the specific of to the American condition. And I think with China, it is an important study in terms of how does technological innovation interact with civilization and people, like how, and I say that because the way you had, Doggett, described in the beginning, which is that this advancement is also built on a certain social system.
Yep.
And and yeah, I think I've been trying to understand it too, because like can you imagine something like the free school being something that is throughout the nation, throughout America, where people are talking about these issues? What kind of nation would it be alternatively? And yeah, when I go to China, it does remind me of Afro-America, because in terms of the general, where there's civilization and then all the different components of civilization. And so something that I've been noticing, and I haven't entirely made sense of it, which is that you see a lot of the presence of Xi Jinping and the presence of the Communist Party of China. And one of these like major, like you'll see quotes by Xi Jinping in like museums and parks, but you'll also see this like plaque which says the Chinese path to modernization. And
To modernization.
yeah, and I don't know how to show it. I don't know how to show it but here's what it looks like. Like I see this everywhere. This is in parks, it's in museums, it's in hospitals, it's everywhere. And it's at the bottom, it says Chinese path to modernization. It's in both Chinese and English. And in some places it's just in Chinese. But it says Chinese path to modernization. And above it are these pillars. And it says of a huge population. And these are there's like, it reminds me of what you were saying, which is the Communist Party of China communism with Chinese characteristics?
Yes, socialism. Yeah.
And so, like, what are these Chinese characteristics, or what are these problems? And so it's Chinese path to modernization, and then at the top with the different pillars, say, of a huge population, of common prosperity for all, of material and cultural ethical advancement, of harmony between humanity and nature, of peaceful development. And so this is all throughout the country. Like I've seen this when I was in my parents' hometown. I've seen it in the West. I've seen it in the South, further South. And so it's throughout the country, which is what is the vision for the future of China, or what is the vision of modernity for China.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why I bring this up, because in free school, we keep talking about how America is a nation not yet born. There's not a cohesive narrative or cohesive history to like even the way we talk about the first American Revolution, the second, the third, that's not something, this is free school. Like this is not something that is commonly agreed upon throughout the nation. But also the future as being what we were saying, like white, but then what is the future if it's not white? What is the alternative? And we keep talking about the Black social system. And when I do go to China, it does remind me of the Black social system because of what King talks about is so modern. And it has such similarities with what the CPC is putting forward. Maybe not the huge population, we're like an okay huge population. But like harmony between humanity, nature, a peaceful development, like, these are all things that we talk about in the Black social system. But yeah, and so I think I say this because I think even in this conversation of DeepSeek and then AI, which my peers are more adequate in, I think I try to fit it into like this overall project of the free school, and as a knowledge structure, which is how do these conversations about DeepSeek, because we also attract certain individuals on the internet when we put forward DeepSeek or Trump, like you get your different audiences. Yeah, and then like you'll have people who think that like DeepSeek is the core or like of what determines the forward movement of American society. And I think for us it is an important piece, but it's a piece of the puzzle of free school. Yeah, but anyways.
Well, I just wanted to add to that because, like, I'm thinking, okay, well, how can we end this, like, period that we're in America where I feel like everything is dark and, like, we haven't reached freedom yet. We're not, and I feel like with DeepSeek, at first I was like,
Say that again.
with DeepSeek, I was like, is this an answer to all of the problems or blah, blah, blah? No, but, like, cracking the American state or imperialism or however you want to call it, the superstructure or whatever. That's why I really appreciate, the discussion and what went into understanding the dynamics at play historically, as theoretically with what you mentioned about the social systems and historically meaning like with Mao and Deng Xiaoping and Xi Jinping, or even the technological and like I don't the companies or how it happened, I appreciate the presentation and because that brings what you said, what is the preschool project, is also like, why are we doing DeepSeek right now all of a sudden? Is it just because it's a news? Is it on, but no, it's about like, how does this affect the moment and how then do we relate to that effect? It's not to say like, you want all or nothing, throw all, but it is to say something about that. And I think that it is true, whether it be that, the other thing with the Chinese, when we did that celebration of the CPC, a lot of people were like, oh, well, China is imperialist, China is white supremacist. And I think since that study, we've not only said and stood by the fact that it's not, we've studied what it is. And whether that be through what you had mentioned quickly in those values, and really, I don't even think, if you even say the word ethics, we have the same definition of ethics, as it relates to China, because underneath these words are all these discussions of philosophy and things that I don't think Americans have had in the past maybe 50 years or the past 40 years. So that goes in another branch for me. If you sit an American down at the table, at an equal distance from either a Chinese person or somebody, or in this case, a Chinese person, what would the level of discussion be? What would the, what would they be talking about, you know?
Mhm.
But so I'm saying, like, I know that the Chinese social system, maybe at first, or maybe it didn't have to be dependent upon the struggle against white supremacy, but I think what happens, or what is happening, or what we're trying to discuss, or what I'm thinking about is how in this modern period, to overcome white supremacy is a part of the development of a society, or how human beings can, I don't know. I'm just curious about how the relationship between white supremacy is to a social system. But that being,
No. What is the relationship between white supremacy and a social system?
like, I don't think that a Chinese person is like, I am struggling against white supremacy. Or I don't think that's at the fore of, like,
No question.
and yeah.
Okay, good.
I'm saying that to say that whether they think of DeepSeek as a
blow to white supremacy.
or not,
Well, maybe not the way we would,
right?
but I am certain that those researchers, they know about the sanctions that were put on them. They know how the white West responds to their advancement. They know. I mean, is that fair to assume? I mean, go.
Well, I'm thinking actually a lot about this question, sir. You know, or like, I feel like what stood out to me also in your presentation, Doc, is how that in, like, yes, it's not like, there are a lot of vulnerable places, like moments, and like, you know, parts to this, to what China has been able to achieve, but the chance for a society that's tethered to equality and freedom allows for more potential to flourish versus a system that is tethered to inequality will then suppress education.
Yes.
And so I feel like, well, to answer your question directly, I feel like one is that I think Chinese people have experienced like what it was like I think Jeremiah, you're bringing it up, like this idea, like, oh, we're just going to be a workshop, like we're going to be like a factory system for the West. We just like also the idea that like Chinese people only copy, they like, you know, create like what is it? They copy films, they make cheap copies of what is produced in the West.
Paintings.
A painting, but I was also thinking like technology, and that you use it once it breaks, but it like sold for something. But actually, I think Chinese people have not like sat with that and stayed that way. In fact, I think it's motivated Chinese people to say like, well, actually, I think that's what DeepSeek is showing. There's also like, well, what actually is innovation? Is innovation a copy, and then therefore, like, it's also like, therefore, like cheaper or more efficient? But actually, is it better? Is it better for? Is what we can do better and also different than not just for the benefit of just one person, one class, or like one civilization, the West, but can it be good for all? Like, I'm very interested in this idea that like the way that China is thinking, that and also what it produces technologically, but also even economically, that it can actually be of great use and like help for Africa and the rest of Asia. And I think that is something I'm thinking that, like, when I was even in Cuba, for example, like young people would come to me and be like, actually, it's kind of hard to get an iPhone here, but you know what? I don't need an iPhone. I have a Xiaomi phone. This stuff is so much easier to use. And in fact, I think I'm taking better pictures than my friends with like iPhone. And so I was even like thinking, like, if this is what like a Chinese phone company can do for like a country that's also experienced a lot of sanctions, then like how much farther can like all these, you know, young people or like in Africa, for example, with these cell phones can do. But I mean, I'm just thinking about this. I'm trying to return to this question about that you like of white supremacy and how like the struggle now in the world is to be able to like, defeat white supremacy and finally release all this potential and like be able to walk towards this path towards colored modernity. I'm shivering, so I feel like all my words are like kind of coming. But I think that that's something I feel as if what you said about how China, not that long ago, was, you know, experiencing like vast inequality and poverty, and also, semi-colonialism, and that it was very, very poor. And in a very short amount of time, and also thanks to the Chinese Revolution, it has been able to, make great leaps and achieve something that the West never thought could happen. But it also can't forget that path. It can't forget what that path really means and what it took. And I think that that's where actually, I think Black America is so much in this case to teach China in terms of what their struggle really means. Also, like actually name like white supremacy as like directly, like maybe you don't see that many white people in China anymore, or you do on a daily basis. But you have to know that like this is the force that's holding back like humanity, and we have to be on the vanguard of it, and it has to be very clear. And I feel like we brought up Du Bois earlier, and something that the Ben Young reading group has been thinking a lot about sociology and also about a revolutionary social science, and something that as we started, we're planning to read Du Bois this week. I was thinking about like even in like we were having this conversation from Barcha and I that like DeepSeek is like I think is the CEO has said something to the effect that like innovation has been in China has been a product of actually like the necessity of the part of a long process of development, not just in like material terms, but also educationally, and therefore innovation requires some form of surplus. A society has to reach a certain level of stability, a certain level of equality, a certain level of higher education, and with that surplus, you can then be able to, make leaps. But then I started thinking about like I think I agree with that because that tethers a society towards peace, basically peaceful development, and also the eradication of poverty, which China has been able to do. It sees poverty as an obstruction to innovation. But then what about how Black America is also always like Du Bois insisting that even in the face of empire and also slavery, the white supremacist social system, when there is not a level of necessarily stability, there's in fact less this in a society where education is purposefully cleaved, in a society where schools today don't educate Black children, but even back then, Du Bois took up the struggle even against like Booker T. Washington. It's like, is an industrial school or even no college like the path for our people? Like no, in fact, like science can only has to come out of a real commitment towards education, but also we can still, in fact, like do science, or maybe we can produce something kind of like a knowledge cluster at Atlanta University and produce these great studies of like not just like Black people in like Atlanta or the surrounding areas in Georgia, but I want to be able to study all of like the Negro race, or like all of the whole African American people, and I'm going to do it even if I don't have that much. Atlanta University doesn't have that much money, or that actually like Tuskegee and Booker T. Washington, with the help of like even like capitalists or all levels of like government are kind of colluding to promote a certain kind of way in which like a certain path for like Black people in this country, but it's not the path that actually allows them to grow and flourish and actually change and defeat white supremacy. I need to be able to conduct science when even I have not at all the conditions to be able to produce like science. And I feel like if China can like learn that sort of thing, or like see how I think this proves this in many ways. I'm not going to stop thinking about, I guess, like Afro-Asian and all this as well, like and what this means for the rest of humanity. But I wasn't going to share this story, but I have been thinking about this. Oh no, you sat back and you're like, I'm ready to hear Kathy. I saw the way you lean back and held your hand. But when you ask yourself, like, I think you ask them, Doc, in your presentation, why is it that Asians in America are different than Asians in Asia? And I think and also if there are so many Asians that have become like that, it's like at the forefront of the American like development of AI and technology in Silicon Valley, like if the white man cuts them loose, would they be able to go back to China or India or whatnot? The answer is going to be really difficult, is what I think, and that's because I feel like I'm reflecting on like my father, who actually for I think like 20 years of his life, after coming to this country and getting his master's and then starting to work for a cell phone company in the U.S., he quickly rose in that company to be able to not just like to develop products, but actually be able to leverage his Chinese skills, his ability to make sense of the Chinese like market and landscape, and basically be an interlocutor between this American company and China. And that was a really comfortable place for him for 20 years. And this is also coming off of the fact that he could not have achieved any of this. He couldn't have come to America. He couldn't have gotten the education that allowed him to come to America if not for the Chinese Revolution. Like my grandparents may not have had that much when they were raising him, but my grandfather was a member of the Communist Party. And I feel like if it had been a different generation in China, I don't know how much education he would have gotten. I don't know how much, I don't know how far he would have gotten, but in many ways, after I think Xi Jinping came into power, and then U.S. companies, I think, started responding to the fact that like China was taking a different path. This U.S. company actually cut him loose. Like they let him go. They said that there was not going to be so much room for us to grow in Asia or in China, and like for my dad to reach a certain peak in his career and then just get let go without like all too much to it is something I don't think he's recovered from.
I can understand.
And I think it actually is something that even like it took me a long time to understand like what it means to invest in basically a white supremacist social system without even knowing it. And then realize like once the white man is done with you, you're like you're nothing to them. But it is something that I still ask myself, like, well, Dad, you and I share a lot of admiration for like, you're a Chinese man, you admire so much of our civilization, you know more about all of this than I could ever achieve to know in my lifetime. But I think, why is it that when we go to China together, you enjoy being in Taiwan more than I enjoy being in Taiwan, even though there are many things that like, it's not that he hates his time in China, but it's uncomfortable in many ways.
Really? Could you bring more?
Oh, well.
Okay, you don't have.
That's the question I asked. It's like, why, like, is there something about, like, you're Chinese, but there hits a certain wall if you've invested too much into, like, what it means to become white in this country. And to go back is a painful reminder, I think, of the things that like you had to let go of, or the fact that like China didn't even take the path that maybe you imagined, but instead left ahead of it, like grew in ways that you were surprised. Maybe you ask yourself, like, if I had stayed, what could have I contributed or done, or how would my life be different? I don't know if those are the same questions, but I would ask those questions if I were him. But in some ways, we had this argument in Taiwan because I think I was trying to kind of start to have a conversation with him about the things I shared with you, and they were really uncomfortable for my dad. And so we even started talking about like, well, like eventually we're gonna have to, we will be seeing a more fully reunited Taiwan with the rest of China, as this process is probably pretty inevitable. I don't know how it's going to go down, but it has to happen one day or another. And he found that to be really a hard conversation. And he started being like, so is like the Russian invasion of Ukraine justified in your mind? And oh wow, there's a lot coming out in terms of these assumptions about the West and like imperialism, but also even like what in terms of civilization. And so I mean this is something in terms of white supremacy and this question that we're asking. I think that's at the core of this conversation as much as what as of knowledge as well. And I kind of strung that together. These are all things that I think this conversation dislodged in my brain.
Go ahead, Barto. Barto, you want to go ahead, man?
Yeah, I wanted to tie this, both trying to answer your question again, as well as how AI and the West pertains to the democratic and revolutionary transformation of society. Given that through AI, people have, and the elite have basically, in a sort of way, hitched their horse on not even bothering to know the world and just giving some of their authority to this super intelligence, quote unquote. And then you have all this politics about who deserves to even have this, what is this intelligence going to do for us, and then who deserves to have it. You know, when they pledge $500 billion to develop these AI capacity, I mean, at least when you buy GPUs, they're only that good for a few years, man. It's not like where you build a port or a railroad and that increases your productive capacity over a long period of time. Even these computers are not even that good for that long. You know what he talked about from Moore's law, and there's like not even a demonstrated immediate use for them other than automating high-paying computer jobs like coding. And yet they're trying to use this to direct and reorganize society. And they're saying we don't even have to concern ourselves completely with how this AI works, because people don't even fully understand how neural networks work. And then you can only have a certain select group of people can even have control over this right now. OpenAI and Anthropic, which is Chinese and Indians working for Sam Altman, and the Jews who are financiers are going to reorganize society based on this basis. This is completely removed from a democratic transformation of society where, wow, like suppose an AI could know, who can even know, who deserves to know, and why do we even know? That is completely off the table when imagining a technological future based around artificial intelligence. And so the Chinese system as a whole completely threatens that notion in its entirety. I mean, that's why they're even so upset that this DeepSeek, which is, as you all have said, not a single person in the DeepSeek team has gotten any education or experience. It's all Chinese developing their own capacity to develop themselves on their own terms. That's why they have all these export control laws, so that the Chinese are not able to develop themselves on their own terms. And then they're threatened by the model being open source, because this development, this knowledge, this capacity of human beings is now available to everybody. And now the world can decide how to use it and why you're going to use it. So this completely threatens the white supremacist organization of the world and worldview,
I think you're right.
that right now is holding on by a very thin thread. And so it's still an open question for us to decide, not just AI, I think that's really secondary, but how we're even going to see the world, and what is the purpose of knowledge in the world, and how that knowledge is going to function, how we're even going to be able to produce that knowledge, for who and for why. These are open questions that are on the table for all of humanity. special emphasis on the American people, but how we're even going to relate to the rest of the world. And it's very highly exemplified. I guess if you look, the white West is showing their asses. To be honest, they're showing their hand in how they view the future, and how they're trying to get to that future with AI, which tells you that they don't even have the full capacity themselves to achieve this future that leaves out the rest of humanity. So that really puts us in a great position to be in.
Yeah, I wanted to piggyback on Eddie.
What's the support?
I just wanted to mention one thing, just not long, but to go back to what Kathy was saying, and I think this is the question that you guys were also sort of talking about, the question of AI and the human being, which I guess we have been talking about this for for the main part of last year. I think question of the human being and how how the epistemology that defines white supremacy social system, in how it works, that does not see the human being because it has never allowed itself to study the human being. And I was thinking, this is what Kathy was also mentioning, but reading this, just listening to this person, this CEO of this DeepSeek. I mean, I've never heard or imagined a CEO to talk the way he does. And I think this is the interview that Nuri was mentioning from a year and a half back. But the way he talks about, these people who comprise of the team, he's saying that firstly, when he talks about innovation, you can see that the interviewer is constantly asking, for a formula of how do you define, how do you get to, what you have become? Why aren't there other companies in China even who are not doing what you do? And I think the way he deals with that question is that you can't really have a formulaic answer to these things about how do you get an innovative product, how do you define success, how do you define what the purpose of this company or this hedge fund or whatever is going to be. But it's ultimately what he says is that it's a question of curiosity of people, and that really is that's why we innovate. And he sees innovation, like Kathy was saying, as the natural product of every society. He says that it's the natural outcome of humanity. And the other thing which I found interesting is that he says that it's like innovation is wasteful. It's wasteful in the sense that you have to have the freedom to make mistakes. You have to have the freedom to waste money even. And it sort of showed, I think people were talking about this before, but just how the role of like money, or even the way it's not even just about money, but it's about how science and technology functions in the West, or how it's supposed to function in the West. I mean, it's true. I think it's easy to make this sort of an artificial distinction between technology and the pure sciences, to say that okay, this this run after profit and so on, it's a part of the technology, the technocrats and so on. But I don't see it any different from the running after scientific papers in the natural science, or whatever the pure sciences. It's the same in academia, but you're trained. The whole purpose of your your purpose of doing science or doing technology is really, it's centered on the outcome of what, where can you go from what you have. And I think what this guy is saying, the founder, the CEO of DeepSeek, what he's saying is that okay, what we are really more concerned about is to understand why we are where we are. And all the people that he's talking about, all these local people, he's saying people who are trained in China. He's saying that we do value creativity over credentials. And I think that's a deep thing for a CEO to say, but I think here it's even a deep thing for a scientist to say. Nobody says that, I mean, it's at least nobody believes it. So you believe in the kind of credentials and stamps and so on and so forth that has been given to you. And I think what he's saying made me rethink the way have always thought about technology. I mean, it's sort of it is a product of how technology is thought of, in the West. That it's ultimately it's about it's about profit and so on. But it was the first time I believe, when a CEO is saying that we are concerned about the curiosity of the young people, curiosity and creativity. He's saying that this all of this comes out of creativity, and even there's something funny. But at the end of that interview, like when the interviewer is sort of has given up trying to get a formula out of it, and then he asks about the kind of people who work at DeepSeek or this high-flyer hedge fund. He says that the people around us are people who really like who are actually curious and like doing what they do. So you spend 50-hour weeks or whatever writing code and stuff, and then he says that it's a bit like your entire body and your brain is tired, but your spirit is reward. I mean, it made me think of that woman in Montgomery. My spirits are tired, but I don't think that's the consciousness that he necessarily has. But I think it shows the basic the basic unity in human striving, which definitely this man is a product of. He's a product of the Chinese Revolution and where China is today. And I think I thought with your presentations, the other thing I wanted to say, I think this was very important to clarify that we are not talking about a pre-revolutionary, we're not talking about going back to pre-revolutionary ideas. That's the thing. I think that it's very easy to sort of interpret all of this as, okay, this is it's a Confucian society or even a Buddhist society that is responsible for this achievement, which it may or may not be true, but I don't know if it's useful to think in those terms, because I think with the Chinese Revolution, and especially what we have dealt with 4 years back with the China conference, was I remember the essential fact of a constant assessment of why we are where we are, starting with what Tarana was saying with Deng Xiaoping, and then with Xi. I think it's scientific practice, and in fact I think this is also the scientific practice of the free school. We're constantly trying to assess where we are and how did we get here and what this means for the future. And I think this is
Absolutely.
It's a lesson to be learned for science and the practice of science in the West, science and technology in the West. This is precisely what the question has always been in the epistemology that comes out of white supremacy, that how far can how far can I go from what I have right now, and I'm not going to ask the question of how I got where I got. So therefore, you forget that Europe was Europe was primitive 300 years back, younger than any other civilization, and to assess that, I think it has been shown that this without this assessment you can't go very far anymore. China has been able to achieve something which clearly nobody in the world at this point believes possible.
Can I just raise one quick, just tying what you're saying to what Kathy was saying, to live a life in alienation, disengage. For example, use the example of a Chinese person who comes to the United States, and in order to survive here or to have a professional career, she or he must disengage, must alienate oneself from society, And what you're saying about the scientists in China is that she or he is organically a part of society, the strivings of society, the success of society. But here, and I guess, for me, that is the most painful thing. to think about not being tethered to something larger than yourself. And that is, I know, talking to Albert and Michelle about the recent studies of the Chinese community. I don't know the work, but it would be interesting to know if one of the principal categories of identity is to celebrate disengagement and alienation. We are successful because we're not a part of, we are separate from. And that, when you talk about the tension between you and your dad, it is epistemological. And it's for me, it's sad, I have to say.
Yeah, like how can we see the same things but draw such different conclusions?
Yeah.
Epistemologies.
Yeah.
Just wanted to circle back to the question of like, what is the role of innovation? Who does innovation serve? And particularly, I wanted to pose to the group the question of the ecological component of innovation, which I don't think we've talked too much, but I think it's the case of DeepSeek versus OpenAI even. So like in the case of OpenAI, the whole point was to invest and disregard environmental impact to achieve this great thing. And now we have a system that totally cuts right through that on way more obsolete processing power and all that. Like, if we believe, it sounds like we're all invested in the idea that to a degree, the advancement of this technology could be used for the betterment of society. Is that, and does it have to be inherently based on man over nature? Right? Which is kind of what it seemed the presupposition was for OpenAI. We have to build these processing centers, use all this water, take all these resources from the earth, and we're going to do it because we don't really care about the aftereffects. And I'm curious how people who are more familiar with the topic from the table think about the ecological connection to this, and also the ecological critique of white supremacy and the white supremacy system, and how it then creates something like OpenAI, right? One of the things that I would connect to that I'm not completely familiar with yet, but has come into my orbit recently, is the degrowth movement. So the idea that to continue on as a human civilization, the entire productive capacity of the world, which at the moment is reliant on the use and the exploitation of the world's resources, which are rapidly pushing us toward ecological collapse, needs to change. And how do we do that? So it doesn't sound like we've talked a lot about this around the table. I'm trying to get more familiar with why that's important, because I do think it's important, because I think the progress of history should not be looked at without considering the potential for actual collapse of the human being. And so I'm curious if people around the table have more familiarity with why the ecological component should be considered, and maybe why in the case of DeepSeek versus OpenAI, it's a success for someone who's concerned about a more progressive ecological connection to technology.
I've thought about this a little bit, and maybe my answer might not be what you expect.
Yeah.
But
I don't know what to expect. I'm just here.
I was taught this in my English class, that there are taught me this. You're talking about the human versus nature conflict, and sort of man and AI and nature and this conflict going on. But I would suggest that the primary conflict is the human versus human conflict. Not to say that the human versus nature conflict isn't important, but that the human, before we can move on to the human versus nature problem, we have to figure out the human versus human problem first.
Oh, interesting. Go. I'm sorry. I'm just.
I had
sorry. I
work
get
out
it.
better. No, I don't think I have it worked out entirely, but I had it worked out better when we were talking about Winston and the overdetermination of, basically problems, which problem is overdetermining? And yes, I could phrase it better, but the clean energy and the AI problem, it does tie back into imperialism determining, force in our society, because the relationship between the first world countries, and this was brought up with the chip sanctions as well. The relationship between the first world countries, where they're coming out and they want to do the Paris Climate Agreement. They want to have all these carbon tax and limits and everything. But there's a book, or there's a scholar, Hajun Chang, from the University of Cambridge, from one of those medieval universities. But I like what he had to say, because he called what the Western model the golden ladder. And once the Western economies built their economies on colonialism and slavery and neoliberalism, they kicked the golden ladder and they created the IMF and the Bretton Woods complex, and they forced economies to, under certain rules, basically to not invest in themselves, so that they could have access to world capital. And so what Hajun Chang says is that if you're looking forward, what these first world countries are going to do is they're going to say, you can't produce this much pollution, we're going to come to an international agreement. But they were the ones who created all the pollution that we're dealing with in the first place. And there needs to be, and this is why the relationship between China is so important, because it's not like, oh, we're pro-China, I'm pro-China because China's relationship with the rest of the world is different than the relationship with the West. So, China has a problem with pollution, India has a problem with pollution, but this problem with pollution and the environment can't be solved in climate change, can't be solved until we come together as a world pass and decide, what standardized rules that the whole world are going to live under, but also that are fair given the history of the development of these nations. So I would say, I think that when I think about the human versus nature conflict, because I used to be an anarchist, a green anarchist, and so, but the problem with approaching the problem like that is it leads you down. A lot of the anarchists have anti-human ideologies, meaning that humans are the problem with the environment. If we just disappeared, then we would, the environment would actually heal itself. Earth is good, humans are bad. Obviously, we don't believe in that. We have to return to human-centric philosophy.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
The human versus nature conflict, that's in geopolitical economic groups.
Speak up just a
The
little.
geopolitical economic groups, the largest landowners is the British family. No family owns more land in any country that you can imagine. Street swaps here, area, okay. So that whole human versus ego came out of dominance. Us restricting the use of natural resources for people to the war. So if you get economic, it's total nonsense. And what we have right now, ego. You're a scientist. You can manufacture statistics to say whatever you want.
No question.
It was it's a statement and in fact, once again, he said you can see that it might be exaggerated. And I don't know about the West. The United States made a strategic move. When we were doing it for a moment, Russia and Eastern Europe will determine where Russia has the largest population in Europe. The largest number, outside of America, and so if they're able to withdraw something that's somewhat longer, in World War I, the West is ready. You still have Europe. And so right now, how does the United States go forward with this relationship with Russia? Can they break Russia? If they're successful in that, they're rearrange the board, chessboard, and also allow to put the straighter on China. Because China needs Russia. If China needs strategic resources to run, also need access to the art, and that's the true route around the world to straight. You want to straight routes or going around. And that changes the world kind of because you can move goods. If China was together, China can move goods around the world. So say consumers, they can move shippers around the world. That's huge. America has to disrupt the Russian-China relationship. Is one spot. What's is one spot. And Russia is still carrying. That has in the DNA. Also, the fact that it is also the Central European country, they will talk about numbers. And if you go below the surface and talk to them, it's still there. The polls are always the word about, still worried about China. What's China's intentions? So if I was a good white race, I would definitely play that part. Do you want a Mongol empire sit on your border? Okay, and that's what you're doing. I mean, I would put it, and I think Trump, a lot of Trump's relatives, Eastern Europeans, his family back to Russian families, if you look at the women, they like Eastern European women. So don't play that. Don't play that. Between China and Russia, it's not so easy things. It's kind of that. And you look at history, look at Peter the Great, Catherine, they wanted the West.
Yeah.
The problem is that the West engage with the West in own terms. If the West is down Russia, you can engage us on your terms to become part of the West. It changes just completely. You know, and that's what
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, the deep structure of societies and civilizations are embedded in long historical experiences. I agree with you. Eastern Europe, and pretty much Germany only entered something like the modern world. Well, Germany with Bismarck, and then Eastern Europe after the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian and the Ottoman empires. I agree with you. If I could, I don't want to talk to, but I agree with you. Human progress has not come as far as sometimes we think. It really hasn't. And I think the measure of that, I agree with you, Joe, is more Eastern Europe. That's why I think so much of the future depends upon advanced civilizations and societies like China. I really do. And I think we would both agree with Samir's formulation that the human issues, the human contradictions, and resolving them are the key to resolving the other issues. If I mean, maybe I don't know.
Eastern Europe taking over
That's
the model,
yeah.
and also that's the one piece that's missing for white population.
So you think Russia sees China as like a new Mongolian empire?
Some of them, yes,
You think the
it's part of the Russian ruling class.
But see, the Russians are a big part of Asiatic. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Well,
What they refer to them as, they refer to them as black Russians.
yes.
Because you go to the West, I mean, those people are Swedish, Finnish, Slavic. That's where they came from. Yes. So I'm not saying that, but I'm saying if you take Europe, themselves differences, and Germany right now, you position yourself in Russia for what? If the Russians and the Eastern Europeans and Europe and America can sell their differences, then white supremacy,
Would drive them away from China.
yes, it will rank. It will withdraw it back totally. So I mean, this part is always over. This is like sort of the council power issues, but all these other things. The whole crisis, you know, let's face it, if you look at the World Economic Forum, all from pretty much Western Europe, Eastern Europe, United States, they got the difference. Okay, and this whole this breakthrough with China, it can work two ways. Either they can scare the hell out of all of them collectively, or things can continue to fragment. Put it this way, I would do better than not doing what they have to do to maintain your political economic space. Also, you have to read is what are geopolitical economic benefits. And as long as they can do that, they don't want war and conflict.
Well, maybe we can look at the chat. This is interesting.
We have a lot of comments, so I'm going to be selective. M. Sparks, Todd, Michelle Bell, Bombalai, Nabila, Mobilization for Mumia. Many people say good morning. Let's see. Nabila says, you can say the white man, or as Dr. Francis Cress Welsing says, people who classify themselves as white.
Okay.
Mobilization for Mumia said, thank you for this info on what I didn't know that I need to know. Thank you for the food for thought. I will be feeding from here more often. Wow. Nigus Christos asked, where is the school located? We're in Philadelphia at the Church of the Crucifixion. And they said, very informative lecture. Bombalai 7 says, you can see many places in the world, as well as in white Europe, the idolization of the Western cowboy, baseball, etc., even in Japan. Let's see. Michelle Bell said, I've never been there, but certainly the COVID tyranny in China was a terribly dark chapter. Should never be repeated anywhere. Makes me never want to go there, I'll say that much. But then I think Todd had responded a while down. I can't find it. Oh, Michelle, you reflected on the COVID tyranny in China. As Americans, we have to dig a little deeper to find the truth there. At first, the Chinese embraced the restrictions. And Michelle said, yes, that's right, Todd. Then Todd said, when the people reached their breaking point, saw through the lies from the West around the illness, they changed. And the CPC changed accordingly. Kind of like China has a real democracy and we don't. Okay, scrolling back up. Dan Feldman had a lot of comments. They said, a Taoist Confucian Buddhist society is clearly more humane than a white supremacist Calvinist society. China rises, US degrades. I'm an embedded engineer who lived in China 10 years. DeepSeek shows dominance of startups to monopolies, open source to closed systems. Innovation thrives in openness, whereas US elites are building escape hatches. China may be a more humane future. Time will tell if DeepSeek was truly revolutionary. It has revealed US hype and elite corruption again. But even AI is just another extraction engine. OpenAI spent years scraping data, dismissing concerns about consent or fair use. Now that a competitor may have done the same, it's suddenly an ethical crisis, a quote, national security risk. Because monopolized AI is a danger, but not because monopolized AI is a danger, but because the wrong people might control it. This isn't about intelligence, it's about control. AI doesn't just learn from us, it learns us, mapping thought, behavior, decision-making, turning human cognition into raw material. And it does so under the banner of progress, all while lowering adult cognition skills with zero democratic oversight. We need to stop pretending shareholder primacy is neutral. Value creation must account for what it extracts. Climate, labor, data, all of it. iManifesto says, I'm not sure what they were referring to, but that part of the conversation reminded them of ancient African papyri in Kemet on medical treatments that don't have signatures of authors taking individual credit. They were reflecting on communal values versus individualistic values and this idea of going along to get along. But Bombalai 7 says, going along's tiresome, constant half smiling. It's not to be confused with politeness. And then iManifesto was just lifting up this idea that knowledge doesn't equal dignity. Let's see. Tom Teague asks, so China's winning an economic war by giving stuff away, ? Maybe for their next trick, they'll build a version of Starlink and give free uncensored internet to the world. That'd be super sneaky. Let's see. John Kintry said, we need benchmarks for language models, constructing knowledge graphs from unstructured inputs such as conversations, constructing shared representations of knowledge and sentiment expressed in public conversations for digital democracy. We're all citizens of planet Earth, uniting around the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Earth Charter. And then they were talking about what food they were making while listening. Jahan said, this discussion's making me think of Steve Bannon's appearance on the Roth Do That podcast. I appreciated his critique of Silicon Valley's techno-feudalism, but more so the fact that he said America needs a whole society debate on the question of AI. This shows the possibility of the populist movement opening space for a wide ideological debate among the people. And then I'm just going to read the rest of Johan's comments. African analysts are saying DeepSeek can be a game changer for medical and agricultural work in the poorest and most underdeveloped regions where human specialists do not go. It's also very interesting that Steve Bannon calls Silicon Valley an apartheid state. Whites are on top. Asian workers are often indentured, but there are almost no Black or Latino people except maybe as okay, let's see. Eric Carvalho says, Xi Jinping thought is a true world-changing thing as it's supposed to be. And then Karl Marx quote, the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. Colin Clement says, even though DeepSeek was trained on American hardware and using American software frameworks, Huawei has a chip which can serve DeepSeek conversations at a fraction of the cost. China has a comprehensive strategy for deep mastery of all levels of science and technology. Okay, and then Dan Feldman noted that Italy's privacy watchdog has ordered DeepSeek artificial intelligence to halt the processing of Italian users' data, citing a lack of transparency over how the company handles personal information, which I guess is like the warfare or like the response of the West, which is to try to criticize or attack China. And DeepSeek, I think Korea is also like looking into whether like it's collecting users' data. Then Dan said, intelligence requires embodiment at a minimum and storytelling to imagine. Intelligence requires care and mortality.
Intelligence requires what?
Care and mortality. I don't know if it's mortality or morality. I'm not sure. It might have been mortality.
Okay.
But I think that was about the conversation of like, I guess like raw machine intelligence versus human intelligence. And then Michelle Bell said, any fair assessment of China needs to acknowledge their environmental failures, as in pollution and degradation. The environmental exploitation sponsored by Chinese businesses in Africa is terrible. Other countries are guilty of that too, of course. But then Bombalai 7 said, has it been proven that China is any worse than the rest of the so-called civilized world in regards to pollution? Think about pollution per person. And I think also, I don't know, I just feel like there's a tendency, and I feel like it's the Western propaganda of saying like, oh, China's bad. But I feel like even in like the plaque that Alice was describing, like one of the pillars literally is like harmony, like ecological harmony, like connection with nature.
We use the
And
concept of ecological
Yeah.
civilization.
And I feel like that's
Ecological
the,
civilization.
yeah, ecological civilization. I feel like that was something we looked into a few years ago. And I feel like also like a lot of what we've been talking about has basically been like electric vehicles. DeepSeek itself, I feel like is much less environmentally harmful than like OpenAI's model. And also I think like the point of pollution per person and like what Samir was saying about like the US or the West has already developed and now it points a finger. I feel like it's really just like not a single or consistent standard. I feel like it's looking for things to criticize China for. And it's not to say that China's perfect, but I feel like there are consistent attempts to, like find an ecological civilization. And so I feel like I want to ask like, like where does this come from? Like this need or like this impulse to try to find something like that about China. And I feel like it does come from like basically our like propaganda where we want to not face like our own faults and instead find faults with others.
And it is rooted in the epistemology, the dualities, the binaries, the good, the bad. It is Calvinistic. It's a lot of mess tied up into this outcome.
I mean, even with discussions of nature, like war as being the greatest contributor to ecological pollution.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, that's one piece. And then also like not entirely for China, but years ago we had all this stuff about Beijing and how, because of the development of China, there is pollution in the air. But like now you go to Beijing, at least like the past couple of years, it's cleaned up much more, which is that they are trying to figure out this question of how do you develop a nation and also make conditions livable for people. But it's like back to what Samir and you were saying too, which is you can't, I mean, it's like 1.3 billion people, so per person. And then also this question of like humans versus nature.
Yeah, also actually like in like science journals, maybe it has not been covered much in the news, but it came out like China created a world record of creating an artificial sun which could burn at 100 million Celsius for 17 minutes and 46 seconds, which is like a world record.
Yeah, like wind technologies, solar technologies, EVs, like they're leading in all of those.
Yeah. So that is also investment towards cleaner energy.
And then Michelle Bell did clarify, I'm not trying to be unfair or offensive to anybody. If environmental awareness and protection is rising in China, I'm glad to hear that. So
also, I guess we're sorry if the sound is not great. Sometimes our Wi-Fi signal is not.
I think it's also a function of the distance.
Yeah, so people who are further away from our central camera and microphone are less, they're not as picked up by the
Okay, I think we're at that time when we should.
I guess we also, because we have the event.
That's the event. That's right. Yeah, we have an event celebrating the birth anniversary of King tomorrow. It's going to be at the October Gallery, and it's going to start at I think 2 in the afternoon, and it's going to feature discussions. Like panel discussions where people from the free school are going to talk, and I think others at the October Gallery too. So everyone is welcome to attend.
And Doc is also, you're also giving a lecture, right?
What kind of just something?
Okay. Okay. Bye, everybody. See you.